I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you for coming here tonight. This is another special library workshop for the Rockport Public Library. At least see if we can make progress. On the agenda, the first item is public comment. I'd like to read a statement before we take public comment. While we would be happy to entertain short public comments this evening, we ask that you refrain from doing so tonight until you see how the conversation progresses among the board. We will design the next meeting, that's the one that's going to be on February 28th, to be primarily public comments prior to what might be our final conversation and possible vote. That is not our regular select board meeting, which is on Monday the 27th, but rather Tuesday the 28th, and we will be here again at 7 p.m. So, with that, the first item we have, with that, does anybody wish to make short public comment this evening? Oh, thank you.
Scared you.
We now move into our discussion regarding the proposal by a group of residents to purchase and donate a certain piece of property to the town. We have heard quite a bit of conversation, mostly with emails over the last week. I'd like to, reiterate, it is within the select board's purview to accept gifts to the town. That doesn't mean that we have to receive all gifts, and that doesn't mean we have to receive any gift that has restrictions upon it. It's just we have to do our due diligence and investigate that gift and to see if it is in the best interest of the town. That's what we do with all gifts that are being made.
I actually want to add
ahead.
something to that, and that this is a somewhat more complicated situation. Yes, the select board does have the power, if you will. I hesitate to use that word, but
Right.
we can vote to accept a gift. However, in this case, where the purpose of the gift is to be used for an extension of the library lot, for lack of a better term, that lot is not currently zoned for library use, meaning that if we accept the gift for that, it will require a zoning change, which the town would have to vote on. So that may be the town's opportunity to say yay or nay, we think this is a good idea or not. So it's I just want to throw that out there.
Well, we'll get into a couple other issues, I'm sure, as we go through this discussion. But does anybody else want to make an opening statement before we go into our actual discussion?
Well, looking at all of the stuff that we have to talk about, do you think that we should make a decision on the Scott property first, or we should talk about it first? Because I think the decisions are going to organically, all come together all at once after a certain long amount of talking. So
By our standing rules, we are in a workshop, so
Oh, I understand
technically we
that.
can't make a decision. But we might come to a conclusion that we would take a vote on at a later date. Because of the way our conversation moves, we might find that we absolutely do or absolutely don't by consensus at this time, though we would not take that final vote because this isn't a meeting.
let me say that a different way
Okay.
and pick up on what you were saying. I would not feel comfortable making anything but the most minor, did we all come away from that meeting feeling that type of statement prior to what I would hope would be a massive last input from the citizens. And my hope is that this design of watching us talk and keying in and taking notes on who's taking what and what points were coming up, that they could, citizens could give us their particular value matrix, which is to say, for me, this is the most important thing of this site and that sort of thing. But without that last process, particularly because we've shortchanged the input throughout this intense process, I don't see us making any definitive decision tonight. I do if we decide, but I think we have to talk about everything.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things, obviously, we have to talk about is, can we possibly make the June? So with that in mind, I submit that this is a fine order to go in, but it's relatively arbitrary and it doesn't necessarily, one doesn't necessarily follow the other. So perhaps a recap of each of the 4 major meetings we had to see if there's a thread of continuity in what we learned would be a better place to start.
Well, as Ken has already pointed out, he has found an issue with the property that we would have to resolve.
Right, so when we're talking about the
Yeah.
property, that comes up.
But I think actually Jeff's thought is gonna, because I don't usually do this, I write down I don't usually write down what I'm gonna say before I come here, but I wanted to make
6-point
sure that I wasn't gonna forget anything tonight. And actually, the order that I did, it was just as Jeff said, is I would like to have a discussion about what we took away from the previous meetings and to try to reiterate what we heard and particularly among the 5 of us to see if we think we heard the same things or not, because I do think that that's important.
Okay. This is a workshop, we can change things around as we
I mean,
wish.
with input from that side of the table.
That sounds appropriate to me.
Okay,
I'm
You're-
fine with that.
all right. So then let's go with that order. Our first one was January 30th, where we heard from the library professionals, the librarian, the library committee. Does anyone want to start? What did we take away from that? I did write up that.
Well, what I heard was,
Burma.
in very basic terms, was that the idea of reducing the size of the proposed library to plus minus 7,500 square feet could be done with minimal, not no, but minimal impact to program services. And I think that's what I heard from Ben, and I heard that from some of the ad hoc library planning committee members as well. And I believe Ann too, and please correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth incorrectly.
I think that's right, as long as we, I don't mean to interrupt you, but as long as we keep in mind that it is, whole usable.
Right, yeah, 7,500 square feet of usable space. And in the same vein, I heard that if we went below the 7,500 square foot usable space, that would require some more difficult decisions about programming and what we would have to leave out. So that's, in a very bit of nutshell, that's what I got out of that first meeting.
So something that I would add to that was a follow-on discussion about, egress, first floor, second floor, efficiency of use of space, that once we get down to those numbers, there's a perception that there's some wasted space in a multi-floor building. I don't know that.
Oh, there have to be stairways and an elevator
In a
and the
second,
like.
yes, so,
Yeah.
the perception that we heard was that when we reduce to that size, space is at such a premium that the professionals who are operating in that space are very eager that it be as functional as it possibly can be, and it's difficult to do programming on staircases.
Right.
Maybe I'll go.
Right ahead. Yep.
I think Ken hit the high note too, that obviously you all would want a nice, robust library, but taking all things into consideration, that was an appropriate reduction that did minimal impact to programming. It does have an impact on program, can't take that away from you, but that was an appropriate compromise.
Let's be
moving
clear that
forward.
we initiated the reduction.
Yeah. And asked, and as I've always asked of our library director, to advocate for the library that you want. I really expect that of you. You tell us what you want, not necessarily what you think is doable. I've always wanted Ben to be the voice of what you want for our community.
We've already stepped way back.
Yeah.
To be clear, we've already stepped far back from that. We're not at the ideal.
I wrote, the next day I wrote up some of my notes, and the final point that I came to was, and I'm gonna read it as I wrote it. Don't try to cram this together to reach a June vote. Better to wait till November or the following June to ensure the need and proposal are well communicated and well understood. We don't wanna be compromising quality just to get it passed, but we want to know that we have what we really need and can communicate that need.
And I came away with that as well. And that came, because as you recall at that meeting, we also had the fundraising, or former fundraising committee here in the person of Charlton and Joan. And they reiterated that along with some of the folks who went out knocking on doors, and Pat in particular, I think, mentioned that, that we didn't have quite enough time the last time so that many voters were perhaps not as informed as they could have been about the proposal. And uninformed voters tend to say, I don't know what it is, so I'll vote no. So I got that message pretty loud and clear, I think, from the fundraising folks and from others who had been out in the community trying to drum up support for the last proposal, that a significant amount of time is needed. I think the fundraising, again, from my notes, we were told, I think, and please, again, correct me if I'm wrong, that a successful private fundraising campaign is certainly possible, providing that the proposed project is appealing, exciting, and has the strong backing of the citizens, meaning the voters. And strong is you know, some people say, well, we'd like to have 70% vote. The number may be different or whatever, but a decisive vote, I think, and that would be required for the campaign to be successful. And then the same thing that Bill just said is that once we have the project and have presented it to the citizens, we need enough time for the citizens to fully understand it. And I might add too that, this is my opinion now, that the voters probably need time to be able to change their mind. If their initial reaction is, let's just say for the sake of argument, if certain voters' initial reaction is negative, if they have more time to think about it and talk to their neighbors and to their friends and listen to other presentations, then maybe they will come around and change their mind. Of course, it could happen the other way too, I suppose. But I think enough time for people to really fully understand it, given the fact that many Rockport residents are very busy in their lives, and they may not have the time to dedicate to really thinking about it between when we would finish it and present it to them. I'm guessing late April, and then a vote in June.
Our deadline for getting something on the ballot is really like the last Friday of April.
Right.
That's when Linda has to fax the final copy of the ballot to the printer. Unlike this past November, where that deadline got moved up by about 3 weeks because of the volume that was expected. We don't expect that volume this year. But we still need to, before we can put something on the warrant, we still need to have the proper notice and a public hearing on it.
Right, and I got the impression, and again, anybody else feel free to correct me, but I got the impression that that period, from the end of April until the vote in June, is about 6 weeks.
Yeah.
That would not be enough that was my impression of what I heard. That's not enough time for the voters to be fully informed and have their questions and concerns addressed, and then make the decision that we hope they'll make.
I'm gonna go to Jeff next.
One of the ways that we were speaking of sort of two different branches, and one which is to say, is that enough to present a given design and explain it without much hope for changing, versus is there enough time for people to feel ownership by virtue of suggesting changes? And I think that in an accelerated timeframe, it's probably a presentation. This is why we designed it this way, and have as many people on board to become knowledgeable about a design, but not necessarily to hope to change it in a significant way. Is that an appropriate assessment? I'm looking at Alex and Steve, in terms of charrettes that we really would need to and want to have. If you were handed the project, when would you have charrettes, and what would they look like?
Asking me?
But either one of you.
It's probably appropriate to come up to the
microphone.
microphone, please.
Hell of a tie, man.
Hello. If the select board made a decision next week on the Scott property, I would anticipate there would be a weekly meeting from there on until the end of April, when the project was submitted for the ballot. So there would be both public meetings and charrettes during that period of time, but there would be plenty of time. You'd have almost 2 months to formulate a plan and have it approved by the public and the select board in time for getting it on the ballot.
I would remind you that what goes on the ballot is the
Only-
request for the dollar amount for the bond.
So with that in mind, it conceivably, you could have another 2 to 3 weeks of design charrette that didn't have enough of a impact on budget to alter the number, so the number is still good. And, but something might change between the time the ballot went in and the time the final broadsheets were out.
The early voting starts 30 days prior to the election.
So they would be,
Yeah, so, if it's on the I think it's this year, it's the 13th of June, so 30 days prior to that, basically the 15th of May.
And I'm gonna disagree a little bit, I think, with what Jeff said, because I thought I heard, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that even with if we come up with a proposal and it's a locked-in proposal that we've agreed on and we've gone through a process and we've gotten there, that 6-week time frame, I thought I heard was not enough to get out there and let the public fully understand it. Understanding that even they might not be able to make any changes to it, but I think even to have people understand it well enough to be comfortable enough to make an informed vote or a vote for it. And that's what I thought I heard. Maybe I'm.
I
others heard
agree, I
differently.
agree, that it would be considered to be cramming it. We'll go to Owen.
One thing, just to, I guess, change topics a little bit, we were talking about things that we heard during the library professional and the fundraisers meeting. One thing that I didn't hear, and it was kind of a cart horse thing, we didn't have a conversation about fundraising as it now relates to the new dynamic of having the Scott property as another fundraising event in town. I would just be curious to hear some information about fundraising potential. Are we grabbing money from the same pool of people? Is this expanding the pool of people? What that whole dynamic would look like?
Well, what the
pace yourself.
fundraising people told us was that we need to allow time for them to study what the dynamic is so that they can come back to us and tell us what they think they're gonna be able to raise. And it can't be rushed. Enough time must be allowed to answer the questions or to even find out what the questions are that potential donors would have. And it's, 6 weeks may not be enough. But before they can go into that, they have to have a pretty good idea of what the product is gonna be that they're gonna be raising money for.
No, and I agree with all that. I guess the follow-on would be just more narrowly defining, obviously as part of their studying of this specific case, the Scott property would be a portion of it.
It's a different dynamic.
Yes.
Changes the dynamic.
I mean, there's no way to know
Yeah.
whether people who are going to contribute to a proposal in one configuration are going to contribute again later, or whether
Wouldn't that,
contribution to acquiring a property is the extent to which they're able to contribute, or there's no way to know.
well then what's the point of a study?
I didn't understand how you meant that, Owen.
I meant it as if the capital campaign committee is going to do a study about fundraising potential, how they would be able to acquire enough information to have us be comfortable about raising $3 million, but not be able to provide insight as to who may potentially donate for the library, who may potentially donate for the Scott property, and if there's overlap between those two groups.
At this point, we wouldn't know.
Well,
True statement.
I'm guessing that because of the timing of each, that the Scott Property Group is at least in its first phase, separate entity from the kind of group we had envisioned and had in place for a little while at the last vote. So I think, and I think we should really keep this conversation for the Scott property, because if we concentrate on what we learned at the first one and go second, third, fourth, and then it'll culminate at the Scott property. But I think there'll be two strong forces, each of which, if they accept the challenge, have significant vested interest in making it go. I mean, whether or not the people who would put into the Scott House initially would have been people that were hit up later on for the library in and of itself, it seems to me that they have a significant vested interest in making sure that all the fundraising gets done, because they don't want to see
Yeah.
it sitting out $150,000 short
So then let's hold that part of the
to
conversation
the Scott property.
until we get to the discussion of what we learned on the 15th.
Do we feel that we've summarized the first meeting sufficiently?
Let me take a quick,
Do you think Jeff wants
I
to
got a
start?
couple more. So I think we've done the gifts and the capital campaign. The next part of the conversation with Ann and Ben, Eric and Joe, was a lot about square footage and program material, programmatic decisions. There was, at that point, some early comments about things like basements and what have you, which are more appropriate for the next meeting.
One thing that I took away from that part of the discussion is most of the major areas are being left untouched. By Ben's new design, the children's area, the fiction area, the marine room, the nonfiction, pretty much stayed exactly as had originally been designed. Under the Reed design.
The voluntary,
Yeah.
Ben's voluntary, his
Yeah.
last go around
Yes.
at making less space, which in essence was saying, hey, if I could, and I don't mean to be crude about this, but you said, here's the programmatic space that Reed has worked out, and we like it, and we're gonna like put that over there, then take anything that has to do with a two-floor building and get rid of it and just pretend that we can have a one-floor building. And in a subsequent meeting, of course, we'll be reminded that they said that the ongoing, the envelope becomes that many more, by 2.5 times the square feet, and so more maintenance on outdoor stuff, to spread it out. And there's a reason in New England why you build up for heat and other.
The one-story versus two-story.
Correct,
issue.
correct. But the gains
But we'll find-
came this last time around from appendages rather than from arms.
And staff space too, as I recall, was
Did
cut
take a
somewhat.
hit, yeah.
Yeah, and that was mainly, again, because it was a one-floor building. I wouldn't need the same amount of staff space on both floors.
There's also a reduction in the.
Like the staff space for youth services, instead of being 511, you dropped it to 125 by incorporating it in the other areas as well. Because it was the central focus on the second floor, or the first floor,
Yeah. Do you want me
the
to?
ground floor.
Do you want me to come up?
Okay, all right.
Yeah, what we did, where you see cuts out of the programmatic space was in two main places. One was the program reading room, which we cut under the assumption that we would just use this space. And then the other place that we cut was in staff space on the second floor, the youth services program space, or space for staffing. We still need some space for that because we want the desk on the floor, but if it's all one floor, I don't need a sort of control point down there. So instead of that being a much bigger space, we reduced that by quite a lot.
Can I ask a question of Ben?
Go right ahead.
Thank you, Ben. Or thank you, Bill. The reductions that you made, and I have a lot of confidence in you, did you ever pass those numbers by Reed and Company for just kind of verification to just make sure it all jives?
No. Considering we're not paying them for anything, I was pretty hands-off.
That's a good point.
They did provide me all of the numbers, the square footage numbers for each individual space, which I didn't have, and I reached out to get that from them.
Okay.
So that's why I had the numbers of like, oh, this bathroom's, 40 square feet or whatever. But most of the reductions we made by making it one floor were in bathrooms, stairwells, elevators, mechanical rooms, things of that nature.
Great, thank you.
And I do have, with 2 stars next to it, a note I took that I believe you said that the Reed 2-story library was the best library for Rockport. I think you called it the perfect library. But the library at the RES should not be a 2-story, should be 1-story. Did those sound like things that came out of your mouth?
I don't really have I don't care if it's 1-story or 2-story. The reason that I made it 1-story was to protect program space. If we go back to 2 stories, I don't want to have to cut more out of the program space for stairways or elevators. If you add in extra space, totally fine with me. It just then the cost goes back up. So
Then we get back to the 8,500 square feet.
yeah. Then we get back there. So that was where I was coming at this philosophically. Whether or not it was the best, I don't know. As far as a 2-story versus 1-story design, it had everything I wanted as far as what I could do in the building.
Owen or Brendan, Ken? But do we have anything else before we move on to our next meeting?
I think on all of the meetings, we should just sort of do a little quick check to see whether we thought we came out of there with a big round picture and whether we had chosen people, and they did a good job. Now, this is all in-house, so we'll just nod our heads and say yes. But I think we should give ourselves permission to look at all the meetings there in case we find that inadvertently we made any mistakes on who we had talking to us.
The professionals?
Yeah.
Excuse me, throat's dry.
I did not observe any mistakes in that meeting.
I could make a comment on the professionals one.
Well, but we're on the first,
We'll do that at the
we're on
end
the,
of each.
we're on the 30th.
so I was.
Yeah, the professionals here were the library committee and the librarian,
Gotcha.
And the fundraising people.
and the fundraising people before them. That too.
All very appropriate.
Okay, I think.
I mean, I suppose it's worth, from my perspective, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that the people that we had speaking with us in a fundraising capacity are necessarily the fundraisers for the next library proposal.
Right.
They
That's
are
true.
qualified individuals who have more knowledge about it than we do.
Yeah, they were the right people to be speaking to us because they had the experience of at least laying the groundwork for a library fundraising campaign in Rockport.
Nor do I presuppose they won't be. I just,
They may or may not be
that,
the next round. That's
that
correct.
body, that
Absolutely
entity
correct.
ceased to exist, as they pointed out
Yeah.
to us. So
Quickly and self-preservedly.
Yeah, they folded up their tent. Okay, we're in agreement there. Then let's move on to
31.
what we heard on February 1st. This is where we had
builders
the
and engineers
builders, engineers, construction people, those sorts, architects. Yeah. The big thing I think I took away from that is that either site is doable, either site has its issues, challenges, whatever, but either one, from a builder's perspective, to put a building there would be basically the same cost. Either you're dealing with damp, or you're dealing with ledge or damp, and vice versa. That there's no one great thing that would override either location to say, it's gotta be that from a building perspective. We're not trying to build it on the top of Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we heard that construction costs at both sites would be similar. Doesn't mean that, the laundry list of items would be all the same all the way down, but in the end, that the cost wouldn't be that different between the two sites, and that both sites were feasible as far as constructing a library of the size that we were talking about.
I don't have my notes from that meeting in front of me right now, but one of the things that I remember being substantially different in perception was the challenge of staging, staging the construction.
Yeah, but you'll recall that they
Totally
had-
doable on
Yeah,
both
yeah,
sides.
totally doable. It's just whipping your subs into a better schedule. And the perhaps, the intrusion upon Memorial Park and then upon retraction, sprucing it back up. So it might be ugly and irreverent for a while. And then making it beautiful again.
Yeah, it would be more disruptive to the immediate community at One Lime Rock Street than at RES.
Right.
Of course, the disruption at RES could be that they're taking over the ball field for 6 months or 8 months.
It's a big lot.
It's a big lot.
Yeah, I think they'd almost have enough room, minus the ball fields.
But I think the end comment,
Yeah.
what from the builders was, we do this all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then so we could do it. The other thing that I think was raised for the first time and then was expanded upon at the next meeting was the idea that a master plan for the RES site is something that we should think about.
Yeah.
That was first raised at the builders
Yes.
and architects meeting.
And that would take time to do a master plan.
And I think it was one of the architects towards the end, he said, don't design for the car. You know, just from an overall flow and everything, if you design for the car,
Oh, yeah.
that's the only thing you're gonna get.
Another thing that I picked up on that I thought was really interesting, is just from the builder's perspective. I think I asked the question that I'm starting to get the feel that on either site, a two-story library made sense or made the most sense. From the One Lime Rock site, it was because of spatial constraints. On the RES site, it was because of potential future development and not limiting what you can do there by having a large yet flat footprint. Yeah, and then the other things you all already brought up.
Yeah, not done right could yield the look of a strip mall.
I think it's
Where
worth.
they put the parking and things.
It's worth sort of, parsing out or raising that there were multiple reasons for that need for a master plan. Some of them were aesthetic. Some of them were, responsible use of a site this large involves thinking the whole thing through. Sort of bleeding over into the next meeting, I think it was Jane who said, look, your master plan should involve that whole intersection, not just that one site. So it hit me especially, although I thought it was an unfortunate use of wording, and I'm not going to repeat it, that my perception was that the architects found the concept of a standalone building on that site especially daunting.
Daunting as in going in the wrong direction, or daunting as
Just
in?
difficult to achieve,
It
exceptionally.
wouldn't look
Exceptionally.
appropriate to that.
Look, I'm not making that judgment myself. My observation is that I felt that their reaction to the prospect of designing a building there in a way that did not involve a broader development plan would present particular challenges.
A standalone building wouldn't work. Unless it's placed in such a way that it doesn't overwhelm the visual, but you need other things to support it.
Wouldn't work.
That's what I took.
Is a stronger statement than I would have said. It was, they raised it as
Yeah.
a challenge.
Could I,
Go right ahead, Owen.
so, not that I'm overly concerned about it, but Jeff had said, at the end of these, let's talk about the actual presenters.
Oh,
One
I-
of the things, are we not there yet?
We're not quite there yet, but you can go ahead
I
and then
will
I'll
table
bounce.
my comment.
I'll bounce back in. I just want to remind us that the builders in particular, and the architects to an extent, spoke a lot about building materials and about new modern building materials, stuff that we like aesthetically, stuff that we might not like aesthetically. And my sort of takeaway on that was lots and lots of options, but like all time, you spend money as an investment to get a cladding, a sheathing, or whatever that will work for a long time, and that you don't have to keep upkeep. So and then, of course, we did, Brendan and I read our notes from Rose, Keith Rose, thank you. And who was very adamant about cost of heat. And of course, we presumably would not make a mistake in terms of envelope efficiency and then the air-to-air transfer and what have you. But we have learned a lot since the 80s wings went in at the RES site. And we did disc well. Sometimes I find it's easier to identify the hot button and directly talk to it, you know. So for a while, my hot button was, oh, it's too wet to build there. Well, it's not too wet to build there, but you have to do it appropriately. And we talked about the way that the 80s building had a cold roof, mold in the roof just by virtue of where the air was going, and then mold from a flood. So all of those were very important, and inform a decision of anything built on that site to be well-maintained and to take immediate action in water incursion.
I also recall that the engineers and builders were site agnostic with regard to the heat, right? The
Yeah, we asked about,
geothermal, which it sounds like
geothermal,
it's
and
just
they-
not irrelevant.
No, don't,
right,
yeah.
they said other
Great,
things.
great advances have been made in the area of heat
But
pumps.
providing indoor space for the systems was
Right,
critical.
not
Yes.
on the roof. That was a Keith big thing.
I also thought it was kind of interesting, I guess, and once they said it, it made perfect sense. I guess I was somehow anticipating a little bit of a cost saver from the RES site because it had previously housed a building. But it was interesting that they said, no, you're still gonna have to take it down to sub levels, put all new fill in, compact down. I guess I wasn't fully anticipating.
And
that.
remember that he had found plans where for 6 months, everybody's fill came in. Please bring your fill, who knows what it is. So that parts of that, with the weight of the single-story building, was compressing. So it would, even to build a slab on grade, you would be doing a fair amount of excavation work.
Yeah.
Which, and again, that's one of the reasons why the two sites, in the end, they go, pretty much the same.
Yeah, we've got
Yeah.
a lot of foundation that would need to be removed
Yeah.
from RES. We've got some foundation that would need to be removed from One Lime Rock. The foundation though.
And, you know, Lime Rock allows you to
Yeah.
have
But,
some
but the thing
architectural-
is, and that was one of the things that I had not even thought about before, is removing those frost walls that are over at RES would then require more fill to come in, because we'd be putting in new walls somewhere else. And they had also mentioned that after the last addition had been made, the part on the end, and they brought all that fill in and packed it, it's still settled
Right,
because of the nature of that ground there.
2.5 minutes ago.
Yeah. Yes, you did.
Yep, that's right.
Others?
I'm waiting for my appropriate time.
You're, go ahead.
We may be there.
Let loose.
Are we there?
Jeff says you're there.
Yes, ma'am. I was doing it so I didn't have to hear myself. So one of the things I thought was interesting from the we'll call it the Armand Trout proposal, for lack of a better phraseology.
Wait, have you moved on to
No.
February 15th?
I have
I think
not.
he's talking about crossover people.
One thing that I thought was interesting was we had a list of construction professionals that, come to find out a couple of meetings later, a handful of them had offered their services pro bono specifically for the Armand Trout proposal. And I just thought that was interesting to look back in time at folks that you may or may not have thought were biased or unbiased, to find out that they had signed on to a pretty site-specific proposal after the fact.
So I will address that because I invited those people. And I invited those people either prior to them signing onto this, or they gave me no notice that was the case. But particularly the builders, we had them on because they have a long history of knowing the town, being on the capital committee and that sort of thing. And just long history of helping out and doing things pro bono. By the way, all of the people that came, including Jane and including Terry Dewan, none of whom were compensated for their time. So that was a variety of arm twisting, et cetera. The town employees.
Which you are very good at. We thank you. I mean it, thank you.
The town employees, I presume, it was part of their normal job, so there you are. So they were chosen for their expertise and their availability, and their specific knowledge of Rockport.
And I wasn't proposing that as some sort of an issue, or as that felt that was inappropriate. More just, it was interesting to find out about that after the fact.
I do think we would all do well to try and separate the concept of bias from the concept of taking an informed position on the basis of professional expertise. They're not the same thing. Or the concept of bias implies that you have made up your mind on the basis of something other than your professional expertise and are unwilling to modify that decision in a forum like this. I don't have anything more to say about that, except that I don't think it helps us to try and find people who don't have any informed opinions.
And I attempted to choose my words pretty carefully by saying may or may not have bias and not inappropriate, but just interesting. Because generally speaking, I would agree with you.
But also, I think that throughout our conversations, if somebody from town has said, hey, I think, or if you yourself might entertain that, I think it's a fine thing to bring up. And then to have it answered, because if it's on one person's mind, it's on 15, it's on 35.
Yep.
So I think all those kind of things are appropriate, up to but not including the point where they get vindictive and or rude, But
One more comment I'd want to refresh everybody's memory about from the builders meeting came from Tom Albertson. And he urged us to take a 100-year view of this, which I thought was a good comment. I thought that Tom seemed to favor the RES side. That's my perception, and maybe that's incorrect or whatever. But
I would agree with you.
But he seemed to. But I think the 100-year comment is suitable to whichever site we choose. I think that's a good way to think about things, to say, what's this going to look like in 100 years?
Yeah.
So is that a question that we want to quickly, because that's one we have not yet talked about, and we could talk about in abstract and in the vacuum of our minds, or do we want to have a 3-minute conversation with Ben and Ann about, let's take it out 50 years and let's take it out 100 years. Is there any way of you,
Well, I don't think it's that we haven't talked about it at all, right? Because,
we certainly talked about 25 and 50.
well, I mean, one of the things we've been unwilling to eliminate is the opportunity for expansion.
Right. I think we're all on the same page that whatever gets built with expansion in mind of some sort at some point.
I mean, it's hubris to assume that we would never need that, but it's also crazy to assume we have any idea what the community's needs in 100 years are gonna be.
I was actually going to say something similar to which, if you want to take a stab at it, great, but I feel like you'd be put on a fool's errand to tell us where we're going to be with libraries in 100 years, but that's just me.
None of us will be here to verify it.
So you could say, no, the live stream.
Maybe.
I doubt it.
You'll be able to watch it on your glasses and the chip in your head.
Quite honestly, I think the biggest question in 100 years is going to be, how do people get there? Is the personal automobile still the transport method of choice? And I don't think there's any way for us to know that right now.
Well, that's a good point.
Sidebar into the Jetsons, or
Good point.
And maybe we'll all be on Segways. Who knows? I mean, you think 100 years ago in 1917,
if it was at 45 foot
Yeah,
sea level, above sea
most-
level, it'd be, we'd
Half
take
the
our
town was
kayaks.
still, 1917, half the town was still using horse and buggy.
But it kind of goes back to Jeff's takeaway from one of the meetings, which is don't design for the car. Because in 100 years, we don't know.
Right.
You know, cars may be obsolete.
Well, that was the
Wait, no way
point
to
that they
know.
made.
And seriously, 5 years from now, parking your car may be obsolete. The car may drop you off. And then you don't care where it is, so long as it's back when you want it.
Come on.
No, I've filmed these cars. I've filmed these cars for the Department of
If
Transportation.
they make the cars that can drive now, drive themselves, why can't you just order it? Go home, I'll call you when I need you.
I call Elon Musk to the microphone to answer that question. Elon.
Okay,
Next meeting?
well, what did we think about the panel? You sort of brought it up, Owen, tangentially by saying, that Tom Alberson and Alan Mitchell are on the three Lime Rock proposal. Bill Lane tangentially, but in all, I thought they all gave us the best advice that they could. I
I didn't find
don't think
any.
that there was
I mean,
any
I found
bias
I
there.
found
It was
some
all-
preference from some of them
Yeah.
for one side or another, but I found that I thought the information that they provided us was factual and was helpful.
I agree.
Okay. Then let's go to,
And the only thing, I mean, we might have picked the two most old-fashioned builders in the area, but they were, solid in what they knew.
but we want a building that fits in. So old-fashioned isn't necessarily bad.
That's a good point.
I'll let that pass.
Yeah. Okay. Nothing further, let's move to the 15th.
Wow, we can dispatch a 2-hour meeting in 12 minutes.
You think so?
So far,
Oh. all
Well,
right.
I mean, for the 15th, this is a planners meeting. My takeaway from that is the professional planners favor the one Lime Rock site. And that wasn't a surprise to me.
So I'm going to start with a caveat in that when I interviewed the people that we chose for this, some of them made on the phone. I said, sort of give me an idea of what you're going to say, and some of them made on the phone more of a balanced message. But and Jane did say it. It wasn't as strong as she said on the phone, but she said you could do beautiful things with the RES site, with or without a library, but you just have to plan it right. And if you plan it wrong, it'll be the worst mistake you make. So we did get letters from people that said, "Wow, what an overwhelmingly one-sided or biased group." But professionally, what they deal with every day is the design motif and the most current understanding about livability, small towns, walking, combined usage, all of that. And so they have a very specific idea in mind, and I'm sure they tenor it somewhat because they all live in the mid-coast. But through their glasses, it seemed pretty clear to them.
I had been at previous presentations by Jane, and she really hasn't changed her opinion that the biggest bang for your buck is your downtown communities. That's where your tax revenue is coming from. As you go away from that downtown area, and for our purposes, I'm saying Central Street here and a little onto Main Street, that the further away you go, the more you're gonna need to provide for other amenities along with it, which is heavily on, transportation. And, because she did that whole workup on Rockland and showed, wow, you got this huge Walmart, well, this is back when Walmart was there, the Home Depot. They're not bringing in nearly the amount of tax revenue on theirs because most of it's parking lot. As opposed to you go down to the Thorndike building and a couple of those, which is very high revenue. And actually, I think I saw on there that the biggest generator is really the Dunkin' Donuts, because it's a very small lot. They only got like 8 parking places, but they've got all that traffic and productivity there.
So if we have time, I'd like to dive into this issue a little more deeply, because
Which issue?
this notion of the public dollar should go where it has the
Yeah.
best chance of enhancing private investment. Because
Well,
I think that's
we can
okay,
get to
because
that.
I think what we want to do first, before we do that, and I'm perfectly willing to have that discussion, but I think we want to flesh out what we heard at that meeting and make sure that we
Then we
all
come
agree
back-
of
we'll
what
come
we
back to
heard at
that.
the meeting.
So
as
we heard a lot of reiteration, I thought, a strong reiteration of, you can put a library here, but not by itself.
For the Lime Rock, or for the RES site, yeah. Yeah, I-
Reinforcement of that you need a master plan for going to RES.
I mean, if anything, I thought the planners felt even more strongly about that than the builders and
Yeah.
and
They-
engineers.
And as Ken pointed out earlier, we really need to look at all 4 corners of that intersection in that plan.
But I found them, I mean, their main reasons, as I wrote them down, were maintaining or preferring the one Lime Rock site, which they did across the board, was maintaining the vitality of the downtown village, and also stating that they felt there were greater opportunities for alternative development at the RES site. That's what I heard from them.
Can I ask a question? Because I wasn't at the meeting. I watched very focused in a huge portion of the live stream with the kids and everything. It was difficult to get the end portion of it. Did they talk at all about how the RES site has the potential to become what folks would refer to as a downtown district? And that
They
those
did.
same principles that they were talking about, revenue generation, maximizing, would apply if the RES site was done properly?
So Jamie spent some time on that, in a way that I think he described it, the if you build it, they will come, concept. And he went to great lengths to point out, not great lengths, he had plenty of opportunity to point out, examples where that's not the case, right? Where you can put significant public investment, say a high school, and it does not end up surrounded by revenue-generating businesses just because you happen to have invested in a spot like that. My perception is that they raised the issue. I'm still gonna hold off diving into that particular discussion.
I mean, and I asked, because they showed us walkability circles, which were very rough or whatever, a 10-minute walk, and the circles.
And each person had their different
Yeah,
diagram.
exactly, but they overlap to the point, and that's why I asked the question to the planners, what if we have some development out here at the RES site, possibly to include a library? Does that expand the notion of our Rockport Village from just the small, what we call right now the downtown village, out into that area? And the response, I thought the responses I got were not, well, not really, is what I was told, I think. If anybody else saw that response differently, then,
Well, I heard don't bet on Route 1, right? You don't have complete control over that.
Route 1 is gonna be difficult to turn into a commercial strip, just because of the state of Maine controlling the access points, where the curb cuts are, is controlled by state of Maine.
Otherwise, I guess I feel like I heard Jane say, this could work, but it might not. So if you're doing it purely for the reason of attracting a slew of other businesses around it, it's a risky bet.
Whereas they thought that the risk associated with the one Lime Rock Street wasn't necessarily a risk. It was more of a sure thing that it would, with the storefronts being there, with potential, with historical development there, with all that stuff, it was much less risky.
The perception is that they use the phrase golden goose, that this is a valuable asset to the community that needs to be fostered. and this is one of the ways of fostering that. That was what I heard from the planners.
It might be a pale golden goose, but I think unsaid in their conversations about building up again the downtown, and of course Jane started with a lot of historical slides to show that it used to be 2.5 times as dense, and her big thing is you don't have one building, one store, for instance, take up an entire block. You cut that into 4 places, so there's always something new to look at, et cetera. But I think part and parcel in the conversation of the golden goose is their professional horror of what would happen if the library wasn't there. Now all of a sudden there's 1/3 less reason. If right now we're down to the point where we have 3 things to visit, 4 things, Peter's Gallery, 2 restaurants, and the library. If we take away the library, in their world, that's a monstrosity to take 25% of your attraction away, and it's a multi-hour, multi-family, multi-thing. Whereas these other ones are a little more homogeneous. The library is very heterogeneous, and that is against everything that they've been trained. So we may have been seeing both considerations tied up in a ball that said, this is your golden goose, this is where you want to invest, reinvest, et cetera. Now, by saying that, and I think Brendan and I are going to talk about this maybe later too, but so just remind me that verbal construct brings up a lot of angst and a lot of history, and it's not a history that I think is particularly well grounded in truth of who pays the lion's share in Rockport. Does West Rockport pay for the village or vice versa? And it shouldn't be part of the library conversation, but it is an underlying tone in so much that we owe it to ourselves to have a way to actually attach some facts to that. And that would be a good thing, I think, to do, because then people can get away from the emotional, I must be getting screwed because I live in West Rockport, to, I understand how it all works.
Can I just build on that? And it's a super quick sidebar. One thing that I've observed over this process is, and just in life in general, words and especially phrases have a lot of power that goes with them. And this isn't a question, it's just more of an observation that we've got the one Lime Rock site being the Golden Goose, and now the RES site is kind of branded as the strip mall. And I just want us to be careful with our words, because that may be feeding into another word we bring up a lot, which is emotions. And we've talked about the pluses and minuses of those terms that we use. So just throwing it out there that sometimes words carry with them a lot of power.
The term potential strip mall came up in terms of if you don't do a good
Yeah.
master
Oh,
plan,
I understand.
then you could end up looking like that.
I understand,
You
but
gotta know where the parking is gonna go, where the buildings are, what screens, what blocks, what's open.
no, and a professional that's not me could probably counter with a phenomenal argument to refute that entire thing. But just some people may walk away thinking, oh, it's a strip mall, when it could be the complete opposite, and some folks could walk away thinking this is our golden goose, only to find out that didn't happen to be the case.
So we don't have to get into this if you guys don't feel it's a constructive conversation, but I asked the social justice question in that meeting, and I didn't feel like anybody really picked it up and provided a meaningful, substantive answer. I mean, this is a topic that was certainly considered when the Carnegie Libraries were constructed originally. I'm not being so grandiose as to say that we're a part of that, but it's a relevant question. The concept of concentrating opportunity and community assets where there is a concentration of wealth is, I think, an uncomfortable conversation that nobody really seems to want to have in this town. And I don't need to have it, but I do think it's part of what's behind the rancor.
The wealth aspect of communities change over time.
They do.
You know, and, you know, for all the years that I spent in Chicago, the area closest to the Loop when I was first there was, well, they called it the Skid Row, because that's what it was, rundown buildings. Now, it's $1 million condos, because the dynamic changed. The same thing has occurred here, too. That, you know, reading back in the history, actually talking to a person that had grown up in the house that we're in now. So, you know, that end of town was really not very good. A lot of boarding houses, boarding rooms, things like that.
Wait, are we still in Chicago or on Pascal
No, we're here
Ave?
on Pascal Avenue
Okay.
now. Because he came by shortly after we moved in, gave me a history of the thing, back when they were putting in the Route 1 bypass. And it was a boarding house. They had like 15 people living in there that came in, had their breakfast, had their dinner, took their lunch to work. But that was the nature of the neighborhood. It's not like that anymore. You know, when you look at, you know, what the downtown area here was, it was lime kilns, ice houses, shipbuilding. It was a true blue-collar neighborhood area. You know, you didn't get the really good places until you moved far enough away where you weren't inundated with the smog and the smoke. You know, so, you know, what I'm saying is neighborhoods change, and they don't always change for the better. Sometimes they change for the worse, and then they come back and move around.
However, in the foreseeable future, the coin of the realm is Waterview. So, so that in and
But
of
we're
itself-
also being asked, you suggested it, look at it 100 years from now.
Yeah, aside from the water coming closer to your toes, I don't think
You know?
that's gonna change.
It's a hoax perpetuated by China. Jeff, get your facts straight. Anyway, moving on.
No. You're like, no, your question about social justice is well founded. And, you know, there are a couple of things on the planning board that we really haven't taken into consideration here. It's been in the newspapers, people have been talking about it.
Let's
The idea of
what are we talking
building a, hotel and other office buildings right down here on Central Street, and then housing out along, between where Hoboken Gardens is and where the RES property is along Route 1. There's talk about great development, which, if they're young families, maybe that is where the library should be,
Well, I think-
where the people that really need to use it are.
You know, the interesting part about Rockport is it's a spread out town. Yes, we have a concentration of homes in the village and in a few other places around town, but the population is pretty well dispersed over the area of the town. And that was a question we got at the end of the last meeting from Pat, I believe, to ask us. And I asked the town manager, and hopefully the planner is working on that, to determine, how many homes were within the, whatever the radius was, of the walking radius of the one Lime Rock site, and also within the radius of the RES site, and we don't have that information yet, but my guess is that we're gonna find that in both cases, there's gonna be a much larger number of folks that are not within that walking circle, and I think that's the social correct me if I'm wrong, Brendan, I think to a certain extent.
Honestly, I raised it because I felt somebody needed to raise it, but these sites are like a half a mile apart from each other. Like, it's,
Right.
It's not like they're 7 miles.
So,
apart.
and I guess that's my point, is I don't know that that exercise is gonna differentiate the sites very much from each other. But it will illuminate the fact that a large number of the library users are gonna be coming from a greater distance to use the library, no matter where we put it.
Can I ask a question of maybe Ken or someone who has spent more time with the comprehensive plan than I have? Is there anything within the comprehensive plan that could help with this conversation? Have we as a town already talked about where we want to see economic development, and does that play into providing more opportunities for folks?
Actually, one of the presentations actually showed
Yeah.
what the two comments were in the comprehensive plan.
as they related to the library.
Believe it or not, the comprehensive plan was written 12, 13 years ago now. The comprehensive plan says the Rockport Library needs to be improved, and the town needs to decide whether to do it at its current site or at a site near some of the major highways.
Great, thank
We give the comprehensive plan writers A+ for, they basically
Anticipating our argument.
predicted the situation that we're in right now. so.
But it does also speak, I believe, to the need to foster and preserve the village more broadly, right?
Yeah.
So you guys don't have to agree with me about this, but my perception is that if we were to locate the library outside of One Lime Rock, then that area will be harmed. I don't know that any of us can say how much it will be harmed, but it's difficult for me to see any situation where you can describe that our community interactions in that little vicinity are improved by removing the library.
Well, can you imagine what this little area right down here would be like if the town office was still here, if the fire department was still here, if the post office was still here? It'd be a completely different downtown area. but those
Because of
moved
those,
out.
there would be a food shop where you could get $5 breakfast rather than 14. And, you know, it would be very different. And it was different when I came here, certainly. But it's not right now. There are ways to get it back. And one of the challenges that I think that Brendan's throwing down is what would it be like if the library wasn't there? I think without, if you were to take that to the next step, for instance, I think that the non-harbor side of the road should be built up. It would be really great to have 4 little shops there, have a French and Bronze South, and then have 2 floors of apartments on top. It's a very traditional thing to do in a walking village. That, no one would put money into that, I think, if the library wasn't there. So I think that's the sort of thing that when Jamie says so vociferously, don't kill the golden goose or the egg, which is, I don't like that whole phrase, but he says by taking it out, the potential for a significant weakness comes in.
Just, and I know you want to speak, Ken, and I just want to say it real quick. I've heard a lot in just like the last 5 minutes about taking it out and what taking it out would do without necessarily the second component, which is plopping it down a half a mile away. So, I mean, as great as that conversation is, what would it do when removed from this area? Some of those losses would be compensated by what you gain from plopping it in a different
Right.
location.
Yep, that's absolutely right. The point that I wanted to make is I don't think any of us has actually said, as obvious as it is, that yes, there will be harm to, I mean, these are the kinds of places where we run into our neighbors, you know, and if that happens in your, you know, in that spot and that's something you enjoy and you're going to take that away, then, you know, yes, you will be restoring it elsewhere, but I just feel like it's a fact.
I sense we're moving from discussion of what we heard into more of a discussion among us, and that's fine, but I'd like to ask the chair and the board's permission to talk a little bit about the Bach deed, because we did get some information from that, and I think I would like to put that into the public domain if it's okay, just in the terms of putting facts out there.
I have
because-
more to talk about what we heard, but but this is totally appropriate to do first, so.
Okay. We have consulted with the town attorney on it and through the town manager, and I'm gonna read a lot of these emails that we got, because we got, the first email that came from the attorney, in response to Rick asking and having a conversation with him about the deed, told us the restrictive language in the deed being conveyance from Bach to the town, so long as said premises and the whole thereof shall be used and occupied for a library site or lot and for no other purpose, close parentheses, creates a fee simple determinable with reversion to the Bach heirs if the town ceases to use the property as a library. Sorry for the legalese, but the guy's a lawyer, what can you say? If the town uses the property for other purposes other than a library, the property automatically reverts to Bach unless, in two cases, case one, the grantor, meaning Bach and heirs, agrees to release the restriction, or two, a court finds that the town has fulfilled its obligation to use the property for its intended purpose and therefore fulfilled the reasonable expectation of the grantor through an exception to a fee simple determinable called a limitation of duration. The court process would be through a declaratory judgment action that would name the heirs as a party and would be a fact-based determination by a trial court after considering all the circumstances, including the purpose or purposes the condition was intended to achieve and the time. In summary, if the town no longer uses the property as a library but wishes to maintain ownership of the parcel, the most straightforward way to remove the restriction would be to seek a release from the Bach heirs if that is possible. The other option would be to file a declaratory judgment action with the court challenging the enforceability of the restriction given the passage of time, otherwise the parcel will revert to the Bach heirs. After receiving that email, I sent the town manager an email and asked several questions about that, and this will be a little lengthy, but I would like to go through them because I had more questions about what does this all mean. So the first question I asked is if the town cannot reach all of the Bach heirs, and we have some information from Helen Shaw, there are a number of them, and some of them are from parts unknown right now. But we are able to reach the majority of them. And if the ones we reach are willing to remove the deed restriction, can we satisfy the courts by an alternative service, such as service by publication, for the remaining heirs, and if there is no response, get the restriction removed without the need for the declaratory judgment process? And the answer from the attorney, alternative service is a possibility, but it can take a substantial amount of time and research to show a court that effort has been made to reach the parties through traditional service before it would be allowed. Okay.
But doesn't that also apply to the declaratory judgment version?
Yes.
Okay.
This is a great deal of time. Next question I ask is, if the town needs to go through the declaratory judgment process and we have a statement from the heirs that we can reach that they are willing to remove the restriction, does that make the process any easier or faster? Answer from the attorney, it would be helpful if some of the heirs agree to release the restriction, but the remaining heirs would still need to be served and could contest any release. Okay. And then I asked, in general, what would the time frame be for the declaratory judgment process to be completed should we choose to go that route? Answer from the attorney, a typical attorney answer. It's always difficult to predict how long a court process, you'd think he'd be a weather forecaster, how long a court process would take, but it can take a substantial amount of time. My question number 4, if the property reverts to the heirs, what is the process for them to determine who actually controls the property, is responsible for the taxes, can sell the property, etc.? I got a long answer from this one. Because the deed includes an automatic reverter clause. If the town uses the property for purposes other than a library, the ownership of the property automatically reverts to the Bach heirs, except for the previously noted exceptions. They release it or the court fines for the town. As a practical matter, the town would still need to identify the heirs/owners of the property in order to properly assess taxes, which could be difficult and time-consuming. And then my question 5, which was a run-on of about 4-5 different questions. If the town decides to place the library someplace else and further decides to forego any attempt to retain the one Lime Rock property, thus allowing it to revert to the heirs, what happens if nobody steps forward to take control of the property? Does the town maintain ownership? If not, who is responsible for the taxes? What can the town do with the property if it's in limbo for an extended period of time? If the taxes are not paid, who would be served with the liens and foreclosure notices? How would the town be able to take ownership for non-payment of taxes? So a whole bunch of questions. Answer, these are some of the issues that must be sorted out when an automatic reverter clause is triggered. As I noted above, the property would revert to the Bach heirs. On occasion, these issues are sorted out by the courts since the heirs could contest ownership. So that's information from the attorney that I just wanted to get out there, and I think all of you received the same email, whatever, but I think it's important. And my takeaway from that is that it's complicated. That if we make a decision to move the library someplace else, that particular piece of property would probably be in some sort of limbo for a number of years.
Rick?
Mr. Chairman, First, I want to apologize for possibly misleading the board into thinking my explanation was that it was, the declaratory judgment was an easier answer, and as you heard, both are very complicated. I had another conversation with Phil today, and he is.
The attorney.
The attorney, Phil, the attorney. He is more than willing to have a conference call with the board via this beautiful Skype thing that we have, and answer further questions. But what he said to me, he reiterated all of what you just went through. But he said it's going to be very complicated, very time consuming, and possibly very expensive to go through that process, as we move forward, because it will involve title attorneys and all of the other pieces. In order to clean up the deed, you have to make every single reasonable attempt to notify every one of the heirs, because 15 years from now, if we still owned it or if we sold it to somebody, it could complicate that new deed. And he reiterated this, he said, this is the reason why attorneys do not like putting these kind of things into deeds today. That they have if they do put them in, they have a time frame where they end after so many years. But he said he would be willing to, I think it gets confusing with me trying to bring back information about this very complicated legal process. And I apologize for that if I led you or any other people to think that it was a simple process, because it's not. But he would be glad to meet, to have a conversation with you via Skype.
I just got a text from my wife, Helen Shaw. She has contact info for the majority of the Bach heirs.
I have the
and the local heirs have contact with the others.
Right.
So, and to reiterate, we don't have to find all of the heirs, we just have to find the oldest surviving of each one of her offspring.
Our assumption appears to be that we're not going to be able to reach the people that we need to reach, and I don't know why that is.
What she's saying is we could.
We can.
The information is there.
So why wouldn't we do that now?
And can I build on that and say that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, our current agreement with Bernstein Shore is we've given them a certain amount of money, and regardless of how many legal services we get from them, we don't necessarily pay them more.
Well, if
It's not regardless.
That's totally true.
Oh, with the usual
There's a scope of services agreement that's there.
Seems
And this
pretty
would
usual
fall,
to
I'm
me.
sure
This
this would
would fall
fall
outside
just
of
like
that.
if we had a major lawsuit, that would.
All
fall
right,
out.
okay.
So,
Stand corrected.
in order to level the playing field and not have any residual unnecessary reluctance of leaving the Lime Rock site, I would like to have somebody, probably our town manager, with a strong fire in his proximity of halfway down his back, try to make a meeting with the known Bach survivors, all of whom are very nice people,
The local
the
ones?
local ones, and have a tete-a-tete with one or two of the select board members as well, and feel them out. First of all, make introductions and apologies, saying you've been reading about yourselves in the paper, and we haven't come to knock on your door. And even if it's only Stormy and Gordon and Gideon, oops, sorry. We ought to be able to get, if they're available, say Friday morning or something like that, we ought to be able to get 6, or over the weekend, 6 or 7 family members who could give us an indication. And as the senior members, they can also give us an indication of what kind of, whether the rest of the progeny listen to them. And I think that for our next meeting, being able to answer that question is a very important step, because it's it's appropriate that if we're truly looking at both sites with equal equanimity, to have one site burdened by something that, while not easy to fix in the very long run, is pretty easy to get an indication on. I think we need to do that before end of the week.
Can I ask a question on that? And I would look to other people here other than me, would it be appropriate to have the attorney draft up some sort of official document at that meeting?
I think there's any need for it.
I think we're just conversing. I think we're saying, this is what's happening. These are the options as we understand them. We're not looking for signatures. We're looking for nods or headshakes.
Yeah, I
or-
think a document would be premature
Where the hell
at
were you?
that point.
Rick,
And I,
since you're being,
right, I spoke to Stormy Buck 2.5 years ago, probably, and my guess is that her position hasn't changed, that she, when we spoke, she said she didn't have any interest in the property, and nor did she believe any of the local heirs did. The challenge, I think, from talking to Phil, is that going on what the local heirs, or the heirs that we talk about, it doesn't exclude us from having to do all of the work.
It's understood.
And Helen did a lot, Helen's done a lot of work, and will make it easier, because they'll have a good starting point, a really good starting point. But it's still, they still have to do all the probate work, as Helen says in her note. They still have to do all the probate work, go through all of the wills, go through all of that work still has to get done, and that is gonna run up some money. I don't know how much that is.
But if you find even one person
That says
out of
no?
the immediate community that says, no, I would contest that, that's hugely relevant information for us.
Right.
Okay, if we're looking at it that way, yes, that's a good.
Yeah, because
that
all it
makes
takes is one, and it doesn't even have to be one of the local ones. It could be one of the ones afar.
Yeah, and you may not reach them, in this first round
Okay,
of correspondence.
that's right.
And, for anyone who, and I'm only speaking for me right now, to me, this is part of the responsible process that we started. This is not an indication that I am looking to move the library away from One Lime Rock. In order to do this process responsibly, I believe this is data collection that we need to do.
It's information we need. I totally agree. And it only gets harder with time as the heirs get more dispersed and the generations get bigger.
So I know we're in a workshop.
Yep.
Is there any way that we can help kindle that fire as a
You
board?
don't need to take I'm
Well,
already starting.
it's only because I've only brought it up, half a dozen or so times during the last year, and nothing's happened on it. So I just want to be, for me anyway, I want to be very clear that I fully support this, and that I would heavily look forward to getting something from our town manager that has shown some forward progress on this front. Thank you.
Maybe
Maybe
find a
it was
time at the end of the week for coffee and something with them, invite them to the town office, I don't know.
maybe it was just a
not-
Navy guy, not a Marine guy, that taught me to.
We don't want to ask them for a command performance to come to us for this,
No.
I don't think.
Or we
I
can
don't
go
think
to them.
Stormy is,
Rick's got a car and a travel stipend.
Yeah, I can-
It'll be all right.
This needs to be done with an apology for the hassle.
Okay.
Right.
Well, and a thanks for the donation too,
Yes.
for the family, because the
And is there
donation
anything-
has served the town very well, and who knows, may continue to serve the town very well. in
Jumble
the
your
future.
drive.
Yeah,
Is there something we can do to thank?
okay. Are
So
we,
do we feel as though any of the current select
Only
board
took a
want
year
to
and
go
a
with
half.
him, or is this just a solo trip for?
at least somebody
Please.
from the select board needs to accompany him.
So he will tell us when various meetings are set up and we will volunteer, and no more than 2.
Yeah, if you put out something to all of us letting us know the times, if
Okay,
I'm
sure.
available, I'm happy to do it.
Well,
Do any of us have it, because I have no personal relationship with the family at all.
I know Gideon a little bit, but only just a little.
I met a super nice lady at the dump. She's from Lincolnville. I think she does stuff with Tanglewood. She was super cool. I may still have her contact information in my truck from about 6 months
my
ago.
only relationship is through my wife going out and talking to these people.
So maybe Helen should be.
I mean, if
Rick's
it's helpful, I
sidekick.
can reach out to Megan and Gideon.
That would be helpful.
Robin.
Okay.
Because I don't know him.
And whatever time and location is convenient for them, as many as we can get. Okay.
We're getting somewhere.
Brendan, do you have a copy of Helen's work? 'Cause
I do have a copy of Helen's work. It's in my office.
I didn't remember.
I only have physical copy, not digital, but I'm sure
Okay.
it was.
I just want to make sure you had it.
I have one too.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
one that I have.
I know we have it. I'm reminded of it.
So can we go back to the other stuff that we heard
Yep.
in the meeting? And I don't know how much this was necessarily heard in the meeting, but I formulated my thoughts in response to the notes that Jamie circulated, some of which, I'm not sure which portions of which he added after the fact. Did you guys all read that?
Yeah.
I read yours.
So, what I'm hoping we can have a brief discussion about is this concept that the public dollar should go where it has the best chance of enhancing private investment. I believe I understand the concept of that, and that it makes good sense where many types of development are concerned. I'm not sure that I believe it makes obvious good sense where a library is concerned. Jamie cited significant investment in the schools and the limited benefit of their location with regard to spurring surrounding economic growth. I would offer that that's not how a school spurs economic growth. They don't serve as an anchor tenant the way Walmart does in a development like that. Jamie went on to say that he and his family moved here for the quality of the school. That's how a school spurs economic growth. And we move a school out of a community center to a place like that so that there are room for the ball fields and the theaters for kids to perform in, and ample classroom space and the facilities and the parking. We do it so that there's an exceptional environment for learning and growth for the kids. And if you achieve that, parents with young families want to bring their kids to the community so they can benefit from that environment. That's the economic engine.
I could play,
It's unfortunate that we can't,
I play
that they
Steve
can't,
Beveridge for a moment.
that they can't walk to the schools. That, I concede, I absolutely concede that. But it troubles me that I don't have professional qualifications in this area. I do not. But I feel pretty strongly that we're looking at this economic engine backward or incorrectly. And I'd love to hear your perspectives on that thesis. You know, to me, the fact that the schools are not surrounded by businesses is immaterial. There's no indication there that they're not serving our communities exactly in the way that they were intended to.
So educational mission, yes. The difference when some of the high school kids were at the middle school and they would come down into town, night and day in terms of what town was like. Now, merchants weren't necessarily the strongest supporters of that because you'd have all these kids hanging around. But one of the reasons that you'll have all the schools now in the state that are built out of town as a driving destination is because of the way that the state has mandated property use around the school. So you won't ever get the in-town schools anymore. But certainly this town, Hoboken Gardens was a school, the schoolhouse at top of Church Street was a school. We had, there's still is the Montessori school is back in across from Steve Late's. So we still had and are still using for a while close to or in-town schools that have a sense of vibrancy that don't have acres and acres of fields. mostly for younger kids, but I think that I think that they would acknowledge the fact that good schools bring people to the community. I think what they were looking for, and I think each of the three planners were sort of uniform in their training, in Jane's last 15 years, in Terry Dewan's last 30 years, and Jamie's last 15 years. They all have been schooled in a certain way to say, I have found nirvana, and it is 12-foot sidewalks with tables outside in 3 stories, little shops on the first story, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the gold standard to which they attempt to push a town. And perhaps one of the things that either we didn't do is ask enough questions that would show the less than ideal, what would you do if between this and that, and they perhaps didn't emulate as much flexibility as they might have. But they do have a very particular vision, and we could choose to accept that vision or not, or parts of it.
So my perspective is that none of what I just raised actually has that much overlap onto the library. For starters, I don't think they're anywhere near as powerful economic engines for the community as our schools are. But I do feel that if they are economic engines at all, it has to do with the experience of living in our community, not as an anchor tenant, either in the village or at the RES site. I don't think a successful library is going to result in clusters of businesses around them in the same way that I don't think a successful school results in clusters of businesses around them. The converse of that is just because there aren't businesses clustered around them doesn't mean it's a failed prospect or an inappropriate use of funds or that it's not doing exactly what it was designed to do.
I think that, as Jamie said, in fairness, if fairness to the taxpayers of our concern, then public dollars should go where it has the best chance of enhancing private investment. I think that that's a consideration, but not an overriding consideration. In the case of a library, I think that it should be, it's for the people of the town to use. And if we make our decision based on, use patterns and things like that so that we, the citizens of the town can use the library, that's what we want. If we put it in the middle of a, to use the absurd analysis, and put it in the middle of a strip mall or whatever, and people don't want to go there because they don't want to be going into the library next to the liquor store and whatever else might be next door, then we fail, even though it's in the middle of an economically vibrant area. So I think we need to think about, and could it attract some commercial development? Maybe. I'm not willing to say absolutely never, but it might. You might have a nice little coffee shop that shows up next to a library someplace. It could be a successful business in town or something of that nature. But so I think there's some concern, but I don't think it's an overriding concern. So I think in a sense I'm agreeing that what we really want to do in making a decision about where we would place a library is to put first and foremost the needs of our citizens who are going to use it.
A term I'd heard years ago, and it applies to libraries as to other things. It's a multiplier. If it's there, it can add to, but it won't necessarily drive. It can enhance the community that surrounds it. Jeff?
The one thing I did want to make a case, because if I understand Brendan to suggest that schools might be more of a source of economic diversity in close proximity than a library. A library gets the entire range of ages throughout the entire range of the day on quixotic.
What I meant about the
Episodes
economic engine is that, and this is more largely just an N of one in my own experience, that we moved here because of the schools, not because of the library. And I know a dozen people who would live here if they could afford it for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
We discovered a fabulous library when we got here. It absolutely was a contributing factor to how great it was to live here. But we were making decisions on the basis of the schools.
The library came up at one of our quarterly meetings with
Poor stepson.
Tempeh Medical Center staff.
Yep.
Upper staff. And they said that they use it as a reason.
A sales tool, yep,
you know,
a pitch.
As well
Yep.
as the pitch for the schools.
Yep.
And the overall, the art community and the other things that you can find here. It's again, it's a multiplier or an additive, so.
I think the only thing that I would add is, regardless of where we put it, if done properly and fitting with programmatic space and doing it for the needs of our citizens, which would be that additional attractor, that we've made that attractor. So what I then look at is, okay, which of these two sites amplifies that the most? Because we're still going to get to the same good end goal of being able to showcase that our town is receptive to the needs of the citizens. We have great schools. We've got a great library. Just nestled within that library conversation is, did we put it in the place that maximized its full potential, or did we put it in a place that maximizes to its full potential minus just a little bit? And that's what we're really debating here is what is the best place for it? Because you bring up a very valid concept that it's not going to spring up a bunch of coffee shops around it, though that would be cool.
I'm just
But
saying that's
not
not why
you
we
have a
build it.
library.
It's not-
Exactly. So, but just, because we are going to build one, where's the best place to put it?
But I do think, I've already said this, but I do think one of the aspects of these two sites that is asymmetric, there isn't symmetry, is that we would be harming this region by not citing the library here. I believe we would. The reverse is not necessarily true. I don't see the harm to the community, to really any portion of the community, subject to this social justice business, which I hope we can get past. I don't see the harm in choosing not to cite the library at the RES site. However, we have had communications from a group of residents who've acquired properties along the Route 1 corridor and are interested in having a conversation about a larger development. So here on the one hand, I feel that we have a whole bunch of professional experts saying, some of whom are even saying, we really think it belongs at 1 Lime Rock. However, if you're gonna put it at RES, don't do it on its own. Do it as part of a bigger effort. And here we have some people who've asked the select board, we have some ideas about a bigger effort. I happen to believe we should engage them in some conversation to find out what are the true opportunity costs of placing the library here as opposed to here. I have a little bit more information about that, and I don't want to be the one to introduce it because I'd rather hear it from them.
You don't want to be the one to introduce it at this.
In public, it's not,
it's not yours
I've had
to-
these conversations because I'm fascinated to have these conversations. What they're talking about is interesting to me. They've asked us to start a conversation. There's no question that it's potentially opening up a can of worms. But in this instance, what I feel that I learned from the planners and the builders and the architects is that the appropriate library at 1 Lime Rock doesn't look anything like the appropriate library at RES. That one is a totally different kettle of fish. And there may or may not be an opportunity to speak with people who are already working on some of these ideas. They may tell us, we don't want any part of this library. Please, don't do it. They may say, yeah, we could accommodate it, but it's neither here nor there. They may say it would completely be a game changer for us. I would advocate that we take the time to engage them in a conversation that I believe they have already asked us to help
Yeah.
with. And just ask.
Second. I like doing that.
And it does present a different question, how we approach this as to what their plans are for there. as is what the plans are for downtown
We
here.
may find out that, you know what, it's an interesting idea in abstract. We're 8 years away, and we're, as a result, gonna say, you know what, none of us is willing to wait that long.
Well, I mean, one of the other things we heard at the meeting was a presentation from the assessor as to what the build-out of the ARIA site could look like as, in terms of, you know, a mix of different residential and business and commercial properties and what the tax revenue for the town would be. And I think that was instructed not because we necessarily are advocating that for that site or whatever, but it is, when we're considering these two sites, we do have to think about what happens to the site that's not chosen. And that, I think, as Brendan indicates, is probably very different. On the one hand, we have a large piece of property at RES that could accommodate several different types of development. It's near a major intersection. On the other hand, we have the one Lime Rock site with the deed issues, which might make alternate development, let's say, a little more difficult, at least in the short term. And in the longer term, because of the size of that parcel, the alternate development is probably a little bit more limited. But those are things I think we have to think about as we go through this process, is what happens to both sites, and no matter which one is chosen. I think actually, and I want to go on because I want to follow on to what Brendan said, I think right now, and I want to, and maybe this is a good segue into the 3 Lime Rock discussion, I don't know, but I think we, as a board, have to think about making the decision based on the situation we have right now, which is we have the one Lime Rock site and we have the RES site. We have heard from some folks who have a property adjacent to the one Lime Rock site that they would like to incorporate into it. That might or might not happen. We don't know whether they're going to be able to raise the money or not. We've heard from some developers adjacent to the RES site that have some plans that may impact that site. But I think if we bring those things in too closely right now, it muddies the waters a little bit, in my opinion.
It does muddy the waters.
Jeff, what
the water's
were you trying to communicate?
5-minute break?
Oh,
Before we go on the Scott property?
okay. Well, are we about ready to go to the Scott?
I am.
issue?
All right.
So we're gonna
Let's take a
5
5-minute
minutes
break.
and then talk about the Scott property?
Thanks to all for being persistent and listening to us babble on.
Ken, if
Ready? Okay.
You
We're
made clear that
back live,
there are certain
so,
things I will not give up.
We're gonna go ahead now, and we're gonna do our discussion on the 3 Lime Rock property. So,
Well, first of all, I think we should thank the people that put that package together, because I think they went away last time with like, oh, that was a weird reaction, or no reaction. So as an effort goes, I think that is an effort that should be,
That's my first bullet point as well. I'm grateful for citizens willing to engage in a philanthropic gesture of that magnitude.
agree?
Thank you.
I think we,
Golf clap.
so,
At least one, if not more, of the people who are primary movers in that regard is not here, so. I, for one, am unwilling to take credit for their effort.
okay?
Otherwise, I wouldn't mind.
So how should we go through? I have some questions about, Alex, the presentation that you gave and the extent to which it is the same as how do you guys want to do this? Do you want to?
well, you want to do, I mean, we've done our takeaways, and then we
Yep.
can go, then we can dig into the nuances or the things that bother us.
Well,
I have some concerns and questions, and so I think if you.
Before we jump into concerns and
mean,
questions.
so the first thing is actually not something that didn't concern me, but I thought it would be interesting to ask everybody else about the assessed value. That struck me as an appropriate way to approach a question like this. Did anybody else?
I'm guessing it was more than fair, and it was just a way to speed up the conversation.
I don't have any experience with these kinds of things
I
in the
believe
past, so-
you brought in a professional assessor to look at the
No,
property?
it's the, it's
The
the,
assessed value is the tax.
Towns, yeah.
The
tax
town's
value.
assessed value. That has nothing
We
to,
have a really high,
we had nothing to do with the formulation of that number.
high squeal.
yeah, so I just wanted to make
That's
sure.
Carrie's number.
Yep. So that seemed
Okay.
logical to me. I just wanted to touch on it to.
Having nothing better to judge it by, I'd say yes.
Okay. In paragraph 3, Alex, this group's timetable has been designed to fit into the select board schedule of discussion of the way forward for the library, and the group plans to work with the select board to bring the project to a vote, hopefully, on the June 2017 ballot. I understand that sentence. However, it seems to me as though the hard and fast date in the option to purchase is sort of conceptually in conflict with the notion of hopefully.
Well, I mean, hopefully, because of the nature of the option or the contract. You know, we really haven't addressed the issue as to what happens if it's not on the June ballot and what happens to the contract if it's not on the June ballot. I think that really depends upon the select board's apparent direction and going forward. I mean, if it appears as if, and I don't want to speak in large measure, I don't want to speak for Nick Ruffin, who's not here, and it's difficult to speak for the rest of the group as well, but if it were determined that the library was going to go on the 1 Lime Rock Street site, and if it were determined that the town had a serious interest in the 3 Lime Rock Street piece, and if it were determined that this vote couldn't be on the June ballot, then I think we would deal with that eventuality when we got there. But it
Okay.
doesn't mean it necessarily goes away. It could.
No, I understand that. I happen to be of the opinion that the June, just personally, that the June date is going to be very difficult to
Well,
meet
I've
responsibly.
been hearing,
So-
a great variety of opinions on that subject in the last 2 hours, and it's clear to me that, the longer the discussion goes on, the less likely the June ballot is. And there may be less
That's
likely,
definitely
it may be unlikely anyway, it's hard to tell, but that certainly is a possibility.
But it would be accurate to say that we don't know that this entire concept would disappear if we didn't make the June.
No, we don't know that.
Okay.
No.
Could you
And
give
and
us your?
I think, let me put it this way. There's another set of factors involved in this situation, and that's the Scott family. You know, the
Oh, no, I
discuss-
understand that. I
The
mean,
discussion with the
there's
Scots has not been easy.
There's two parts to any agreement,
And
so.
so, I think there'd be a number of moving parts that would have to come together to make it continue.
Anyone else want to jump in with the next one?
I'll raise the concern that I have, and that's that you're not sure that you're gonna be able to raise the $457,000. That, and you did put it in your fifth paragraph, that while it may not prove possible, a good start would be made toward this goal. Obviously, if all the funds are not raised privately, public funds may be required to complete the purchase. And that's where it becomes a difficulty for me, because for us to expend money on the purchase of property, we'd have to go to the vote of the citizens, and that next vote is coming in June.
Right.
Now, yes, we could call a special town meeting and ask everybody to come in and vote yes or no to, authorize an additional expenditure, but until we know how much we'd have to raise, it's, which comes first, the cart or the horse, the chicken and the egg, rather, that's a better one. Because until we know how much you're raising, we can't know how much we're gonna have to ask the citizens, and if we have to ask the citizens for money for this, does that jeopardize a vote for the library itself?
And add another factor, the longer it takes for the select board to make decisions about all of these matters,
The shorter.
the more difficult it is. Nobody can do anything until the board has
Yep.
made
Oh, yeah.
its decisions.
And I would submit that I think we can make a decision in the next couple of months, let's say.
No, I think we need to make a decision in the next 2.5 weeks.
Well, yeah, but I think we can make a decision and put ourselves on a plan, but then the question becomes for me, do we want to take that decision and put it on the June ballot? And I think my impression is, from what we heard the other night, is that's too soon in order to hope for a positive outcome, because what we want in the end is a positive outcome.
Of course.
And so, anyway, I'll just leave it at that.
Owen, Owen wanted to speak next.
Are you at liberty to say how much funds have already been
About a third.
committed? About a third.
Would be a round number, yes.
That you've already have commitments
Yes.
informally. Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful.
And, that's without having, we can't reach out to anybody at this point. And so that comes from the group that's directly involved, and there are some people who feel very strongly about this project and are willing to back it.
Jeff?
I just wanted to go, I wanted to go back to top level for a minute, just say, what it is we heard on that. And we heard that the property was not necessarily just for a parking lot, and it's also increases the flexibility for the building site and for expansion. It has the potential for bringing it away from the curb some more. Jane pointed out, of course, that we could design in close by parking spaces and not use them until we needed, not construct them until we needed them.
Can I follow up on?
Please.
Topic that you just, you just talked about, the possibility for expansion in the parking lot. As I read the option to purchase, in paragraph 3, the end of the first sentence. So the sentence is, the buyers represent to the seller that buyers seek to purchase this property in order to make a gift of this land and buildings to the town of Rockport, so that the newly designed library, in parentheses, Stephen Smith Architects, can be expanded onto this property, period. I have several questions about this sentence. But the first question is that I think what you just said, Jeff, is not true according to this text. It makes no reference to the parking it talks about expanding onto the property. So my question for you is this accurate to the proposal that you delivered in terms of the spirit? It seems to me that you were describing a situation where the property can be appended for a number of potential reasons.
That is the accurate interpretation, yes. And I think it's important because although the catalyst for examining this project was undoubtedly the perception that more parking was needed at 1 Lime Rock Street, it's foolish to think of that property as merely the possibility of a parking lot. For example, that property added to the 1 Lime Rock Street site adds 62% in buildable area to that site. Okay? That's from Will Gartley, takeoff on the basis of the town. And I have a list here, which I can go through, or simply give you the list when we're finished, of the various possibilities that exist for the use of that property. And I think the breadth of options that property allows, if it's controlled by the town, is the most important aspect of this potential purchase. If the town controls it, there's a whole list of things that could be done with it, a list of ways it could be used. If the town doesn't control it, those options all go out the window.
I understand what you said, and I think that's faithful to what you said the other day.
I would think so, yes.
My perception is that one of those uses that you've raised, specifically the parking, is actually precluded by the wording of this document.
Mr. Attorney?
No, that's, the reason that's a summary, it's a summary of what the whole document says at the very beginning. It's a practice, I think.
Paul, could you come to the mic so that those at home could hear you? Sorry.
I actually didn't realize how important that was until I started watching some of these live streams.
Ah, okay.
Why we do it?
What we were attempting to do, this is Paul Gibbons, what we were attempting to do is to inform the people we were buying the property from what our initial intentions were going to be about buying it. We wanted them to know that there was a real possibility we were going to buy it and tear the building down. We wanted to tell them that in the agreement.
Which is at the end of that paragraph.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a summary of what the document says. It does not preclude us from using the property. Once we own it, we can do anything we want with the property. There's nothing in that agreement that restricts our use. It tells us what we intended to do for it. Well, our intention is to give it to the town for the purposes of a library. And it would have been hard when we were drafting that agreement, because we were going back and forth so much, to imagine how we could raise that much money and say someone, we're just using this for a parking lot. So we were telling her we were telling the seller what we thought we were going to do with it, so they'd at least be completely informed, so there'd be no surprises with them. So the main reason was to let them know that there was a real possibility that we'd be tearing that building down. That's what the whole purpose of that was. It doesn't limit us, that agreement does not limit us to anything. Once we buy it, we can do anything we want with it. We were just telling what our intentions were.
So, Alex, you and I were involved in a thank you, Paul. We're involved in a correction to the local paper.
Correct, yes.
And I guess I understand what Paul is saying is that the content of the summary is perhaps not actually
It's not the agreement.
the driving force of the legality of the document.
Can I just say one more thing? This document, in essence, is an obligation by the seller to sell us that property at a fixed price, provided certain conditions are met. And we tell them what our conditions are. We can waive any conditions that we want. We can say, we waive that condition, we waive that condition. They're still obligated to sell it to us. So if we wanted to, tomorrow, this is ridiculous, but tomorrow we could say, we're individually buying that property, and we're gonna put up a house there. We could say that, because there's no obligation, there's no restriction on us from buying it. We were doing this to inform, just so that the people would know what we were really doing, so there would be no surprises. we thought, and we still think it's true, that if we had a public interest component to our option, that there'll be some, it would be inviting to the seller to participate in that. And that's why I put that in there.
So in other words, if the deed transfers, there's gonna be no restrictions placed on the future use of that property.
Right, either if we decided, which we wouldn't, but we could decide to buy it ourselves, or if you bought it, there's no restriction or anything. But I just think it's important when you enter these agreements, say, why are you people doing this? And I wanted to tell them what our interests were was in doing it.
So is it not a misrepresentation to say that the buyers represent the seller, that the buyers seek to purchase the property? Because the buyers are listed as Nicholas Ruffin and Sally Cook, and they don't intend to purchase the property.
No, in order to make a gift to the land.
We
If you read
intend
the
to,
whole
right?
document, the document says later on that we may assign this contract to the town. It says it in the document itself.
Yep.
So that, I was trying to. you
So it's
can't-
not contradictory, that latter part
No,
and this
it's
part.
a summary it's not capable of getting every little detail of the contract. It's just a summary of what's coming forward. And that's what that's about. So if you look at later in the document, you'll see that we specifically say, we may be assigning this contract to the town. And that's not contradictory, because we're saying, the summary part is just to give a general notion of what we're trying to do.
Okay.
Could I ask you a question?
All right?
What you're trying to say to us really is that we're stuck. We have to do what that summary paragraph says in every detail, and that's not true.
No, you're the lawyer. I don't know, but to me, this, I corrected a journalist who wrote an article the other day, and Alex helped me, because I believe that there was some contradictory information. But then reading this paragraph, it became really clear where the journalist might have gotten that idea. Okay.
The only thing he had, as a matter of fact, I'm not sure what excuse me, Paul. I'm not sure what he did have, because Linda Clancy had my presentation, but as far as I know, he didn't. I think what he must have done is watched the live stream and taken information from that. In the course of writing his article, got confused.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
But Owen, did you have another?
Mine's relatively quick, if that's all right with you.
Go.
Does that
get you in.
same bit, and it does apply to you, just only, and I want to put a quick preamble on there that my question is in no way aimed at you individually, just that we have, as part of this agreement, a named architect, which you happen to be, and I'm curious if some of these, because we're not necessarily viewing this document as a hard and fast document, that Stephen Smith Architects would also be something that we could not have as part of the end agreement. And again, no disrespect to you, sir, just we had a named provider, and I'm just a little concerned about quite a bit concerned about entering in an agreement with a different architect without.
Let me answer that, please. Let me answer that, please.
Let the lawyer do it.
I just want you to know, from my client's point of view, that's part of the package. That's part of why we're here. That's what we did. We were trying to find a way to make it all work. And in order to raise money, usually you have to say, what are you going to do? What are you going to have there, and solve all the problems? So we have this concept drawing, and that was part of it, to say, please donate some money to this. Here's it's going to look like this.
Mr. Gibbons, do you think that's appropriate for a citizens group to solve all of the problems that a town select board is currently working on, or just to offer some potential solutions on major key sticking point problems?
It's up to you to decide what you want to do.
Well, apparently not.
Yeah,
You're
no,
saying
no,
it's
no,
all
no.
lumped
This
in
is
as
just a
one.
presentation. I mean, it's just a
I'm not
presentation.
saying- You can reject everything in that agreement. You're free to do You're free to do that. You have no obligation. I was just telling what one group was trying to do for another. That's all. And if you didn't like that, you can reject it.
And my
But
line of questioning is,
We asked that question How long do these people have to be involved? And it's only through the conceptual design, because by the town's purchasing policy for something like this, we would have to put out to bid for the architects and the construction people and all of those. That's just by the town purchasing policy.
So it's a reasonable, this is the reasonable opportunity to ask, is that also your understanding, your collective your individually, because, I mean, I'm not trying to, I really am just trying to understand what this says.
Let me explain how I got involved.
Yep.
When a group of people were organizing and anticipating buying the Scott property, they asked me what we could do on that property. I talked to Will Gartley, and Will and I did some sketches for that property in terms of a potential building layout and parking. We did 3 or 4 different schemes showing 5-car parking, 10-car parking, 50. At the lot, if you made it a parking lot, you could probably put 15 cars on that site. But we drew different options with different building configurations showing for that site. And as Paul said, the people that were interested in pursuing this didn't want to make a parking lot out of the site and buy it as a parking lot. So the idea was to solve what was perceived at that time as a parking problem, because for 3 years people were saying there wasn't enough parking. So that was the original outline that was proposed. And part of that was when we were notified, we thought, because of the discord in town, that we thought getting together a local group of people, of professionals, and having the ability to, whether it was contractors or architects or consultants, if we had a local group of people involved in this first phase, and when I say the first phase, the concept design, that you go to the public to raise the money and to get a ballot vote, we thought that the strength of the community would be, and these professionals would allow the response and the support that we needed to pass the project. So we took it from the original ideas. You know, someone came in with an outside architect involved in a plan, and the exposure to the community, I think, was limited in terms of their understanding and process. The fact that all of us are town residents and taxpayers, and we all have lived here for quite a number of years, we thought that would give us the best shot to get this project approved. The only reason my name's on it initially is that you have to have, as part of the document, somewhere along the line, you have to have an architect of record. So we're working with 4 or 5 different architects. If that changes at some point, I'm still involved in the process, and that's a technicality, that's all at this point. But our goal would be to repeat the process that we already went through with the Reed and Company, come up with the plans and the elevations and the concept that could go to the vote in June. And if it goes beyond that, it would be Paul's response as to whether there could be a contract extension or something that the document could change at that point.
Paul, do you have anything to add about
Thank
that?
you for
That extension concept, either unknown or known and it's never going to happen, or?
I would not dare to say,
Okay.
because I'd be.
You have a
cheating.
client, yeah.
No, I mean, I'm talking about the party on the other side.
I see.
I would not publicly want to say anything that would, put them in a bad position. I just want to say one other thing. It is wrong-footed, I think, to look upon what my clients, in trying to do something good, as trying to usurp your decisions. To say, how dare you do that? How dare you come in front of us and tell us what we're going to have to do? That isn't what this was about. What they were saying to themselves is, we think we may be wrong, but they thought that they found a way to make this work so this could be approved in June. And
I appreciate that.
And they said, listen, we can help you get there real fast. And we think, we talk to people, we think we can raise the money. We think we can solve all those problems for you really quick. Now, you can free to reject it, but to say, how dare you come in and tell us what we have to do? That isn't what this is about at all. It's about one group of people trying to help another group of people, the town, and then spending a lot of money, for me and other people. It took a long time to get that agreement, by the way. And so I don't, and I know you meant well when you said the question, I'm not criticizing you, but that isn't what it's about. It was about, imagine if it did work. Imagine, hopefully it might, that you'd say, well, you know what, they can raise the money because they now have a concept plan. If we can stay with that concept plan, and they can get the money in time, maybe the voters will approve it in June, and this will all be done, and we can move forward. That's what our thinking was. We also knew that there could be some serious problems with setback issues for libraries, given the fact the property was so close next door. So we studied the problems. We got people to donate some time. We looked at it very carefully. And we offered that as a solution, which we thought, we still think, could work if you went along with that plan. I would say this about bidding things out. I've been a town attorney for 40 years. And one thing I know, bid processing usually involves things that are mechanical. Like, if I'm going to put the floor in, how much is it going to cost to put the floor in? With specs. But for architects, it's a question of who do you like? It's not a question of, well, how much is it going to cost? I mean, they don't bid that way unless it's a design-build concept. It doesn't work that way. So that's why I knew that it was at least possible for someone like your board to say, we like this concept. That's at least possible, theoretically. Let's move it forward and make it work. So it was all done with the greatest of intentions of trying to get this thing fall fast by people who try to do something for the benefit of the community and for you people. But you still have control. We never took any control away from you at all. It's still your control. You can say, we don't like this idea. Whatever you can do, you have complete control of what you want to do. It's just that if this doesn't work, I mean, if we don't have something done in 6 months, there's no guarantee. He's right, we may be able to do something, but there's no guarantee. And so our goal was to try to see if we can make it all work. And that's really what it was all about. And it's a lot of, I can tell you, my clients, Muffin and Cook, put a lot of, and other people, put a lot of time in trying to figure out something that they thought would be completely non-controversial. That's what we were thinking.
Ken, you wanted to ask?
I just want a couple of things. I mean, we heard the other night, and I think you've reiterated it now, that the offer of the pro bono work would carry us up to a vote.
I think, yes.
And basically to the same point that Reed carried us the first time.
I think he can answer that question best.
The group that we organized all will contribute our time and effort to bring it to the same level of.
Right, okay.
After that, you have to get into construction documents, and that's something
Right,
that can.
and at that point, our town purchasing policy takes over. And that's when we'll have to deal with the bidding, which we will have to do. And another question for Paul.
Yeah, it probably would be something like a request for qualifications.
Yeah.
The construction of the library would certainly go to bid, and what Paul mentioned, obviously, if you have a local contractor that is very close in the bid process, that's your call as to
Right.
whether you weigh that bid.
That's in our
Yeah,
bid.
it's in the purchasing policy, so that's all taken care of. So that would take hold at that point for any services after that vote. And my other question, I think I understand this properly, Paul, but I want to make sure. I think what I'm hearing is that the legal agreement that we have here starts where it says agreement on page 2 of 11. The summary of agreement is an attempt, maybe not totally 100% binding or accurate, to try to summarize what you lawyers are going to say in all the legalese. So,
I do that often because.
and I understand why you do it, but I just want to
people-
make that
so
clear.
people who don't understand legal language will say, at least I understand
Right.
generally what's going on here.
Right, but there's nothing binding in that summary of agreement. The only binding part is the actual agreement.
Right.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure I understood that properly. Thank you.
And it's binding between,
Between, yeah,
Rough
we're not
and-
involved.
Rough
It's-
and-
it's
Rough and
between
Cook
these
and-
folks and.
And the
Scott.
way that works, by the way, is we have no obligation to buy no matter what.
Right.
We just said 6 months from now, we're not gonna be able to buy it anymore. And I think that's, to me, I would like to have you answer that question about because we can try, we can always try to do things, but it wasn't easy getting this far. Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy, and you know, a lot of people, Alex spent a lot of time, and maybe you want to talk more about that, Alex, but that puts, that
And the other, another question I want to ask, because we've received quite a bit of correspondence, and I think some of it has been rooted to you as well, Alex, about concern about the demolition of the house and the loss of that. And I just would like to give you an opportunity to address that concern that we've received.
I think I make several points in that regard. The first point is that there are multiple possible uses for this site. Some involve doing something with the house, some involve not doing something with the house. Some involve moving the house, some involve, if one possibility, for example, let's suppose that it was found to be desirable by the select board to have the site clean of any building. That house could perfectly well be moved off that site. It could be moved by a buyer, or it could be moved by somebody like Habitat for Humanity, who's going to put it on another site for their purposes. So, again, I think the bottom line answer to your question is that what happens on that property, if it comes into the control of the town, is up to you guys, and nothing is sacrosanct in that regard. And if you all feel that some other solution to the exact use of the property involves taking the house down, then that's that decision. If you decide that it isn't, then that's.
I did ask a question very much like that of Mr. Smith here, as, could it be reused? And he made a very eye-opening comment on it, that we have a building code. We're changing the use of the building from residential to effectively commercial. We would have to bring it up to the standards of the code,
That's right, yes.
because we do have that building code. Well, I don't even think it's because the town really adopted it. The state governs municipal buildings or commercial buildings, so,
We adopted this,
Adopted the
the
code.
state
yeah,
code for
Code.
commercial buildings. That's what we did.
Well, it's actually for all buildings.
yeah. But, we would have to bring it up to include the life safety and ADA compliance if we wanted to use it
Public building, yeah.
as a public building. So,
Yeah, as a practical matter, the idea of moving the building on the site or relocating it on the site or moving it off the site is not as far-fetched as it might seem, because apparently the foundation as it now exists is not of the best. So it might be necessary to jack up the house anyway and put a new foundation under it, even if it stayed exactly where it is.
yeah, somebody told me it was a rubble foundation and wasn't in good shape.
Yeah, that's my understanding. I've never been in the house, but that's my understanding.
Well, there are still guys around with hydraulic trailers and everything that do move houses, so
Exactly.
that's
Yeah, it's not a big deal.
interesting.
This is Maine. It's
Yeah.
done all the time.
Put it on a badge, send it down the river.
Further questions?
I had
Or
bunches of
comments?
questions.
Okay.
If either Steve or you want to give us an idea, we do have a compressed time frame. We know that, and we're, there are some optimists still that think maybe we can get this on the June ballot. Can you describe any series of charrettes and how you interact with the citizens to have to be satisfied that we can get as much of that design idea out and back in the time frame?
I just mentioned before that if, as you plan next week in making a decision on one of these sites, if in fact you approve this proposal, immediately we would have meetings at least once a week, and also Ben and the select board and the public would be the go-between in developing those initial ideas, but we would have the public involved in at least one or two charrettes at the outset. So we would fast track it, and the fact that we're all live in the area, it would be easy to do. So we would set up a schedule with you and whoever else is involved in this process the first week, but we would anticipate at least 1 week, one meeting every week, and we'd have at least 2 charrettes within the first month, because the idea would be to try to refine the building program. And go back to one thing Ben said, if you, the cost factor and the square footage of this building doesn't necessarily mean that if you go to a 2-story structure, you're going to have to eliminate certain space. The 2-story structure, is probably most of the builders told you, is less expensive than a single floor. So you can incorporate that elevator or the stairwells as expanded space, because you're saving money on the building vertical. So you wouldn't have to reduce the program just because you're going to have a stairwell and an elevator in the building. But those are the things that within the first month we would zero in on and make sure that the square footage in the building program is what everyone agrees to. And then the other thing would be determined from this group, which is more important is the budget. So you'd have to establish the square footage and the budget for the project, and then that would be the catalyst to go out and start selling the idea and the concept at that point.
So can I pick up on that budget conversation for a minute? Bear with me while I find the location.
It was covered in my presentation.
Yeah, we anticipate that the select board and the community will support a project of slightly less than $3 million.
That's based upon a number of conversations with any number of people between the last vote and now. And the idea that, you know, all right, suppose it's a $3 million, first of all.
I just wanted to observe that slightly strikes me as a subjective
It is
describer.
subject- it is subjective,
And
yes.
I would love to get less subjective in terms
Well,
of the describer.
But that's good, I think we
There's
come
some
up to those.
Within, what we did in essence is we took the $277 per square foot figure that Reed and Company was working with, and used that in coming to a number for a library of about the size that was being discussed, and then added in what are known as the soft costs, and that's where we came to that figure.
Can I read that figure as an observation as opposed to a requirement, as opposed,
The select board's gonna set the figure.
Yeah, fair
not
enough.
This group,
great.
and that's, you know, that's merely, if you will, a discussion.
Yeah, no, it
Yeah,
was,
no,
it
but
was a
the
question
select-
that I had, so I wanted to ask it.
It's very important. Our objective is to work with the board in every aspect of this project, and
We-
make sure that we're going down the path that the board wants us to go down.
As you recall, back January 17th, we sort of did our little round robin here as to what we were thinking we wanted to see the cost in. And, you know, it went anywhere from not to exceed 3 million to pretty
Oh,
much,
it doesn't-
well, 3.2
It
or
doesn't strike
something
me
like
as very
that.
far away from where we were
Yeah,
independently.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
wanted to hear exactly what Alex said.
Jeff or Ken? Owen, Brendan?
So I have a question for us.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions for us, yeah.
We heard from some people who were, vehemently against some of what to be fair, when we heard opposition, I think there was less clarity about what was being proposed.
I have had some of that dialogue as well, and I think clarification is an important factor in this. That's not to say that there aren't a bunch of people out there
No, no,
who think it's a bad idea.
I understand that as well, and that's what I want to get to, which is, this strikes me as something that we absolutely need to make sure that we have heard from all of the immediately affected neighbors. This is a town where not everybody is here in the winter. How is this typically done? Do we pull out the tax map and look at the owners of every property out to a certain circle and make sure?
Yeah,
that they-
Carrie, certainly, if this were going before the planning board, if there was something concrete for them to speak up against, then Carrie would pull contiguous properties, and then he would ask the chair of the planning board whether he wanted to go with non-contiguous properties within a certain radius.
That's how it happens. Okay.
Yeah, so we have that information. And it could be a postcard saying, watch this live stream.
Owen?
So it's a question that I actually don't necessarily want you to answer. Um,
You got your out.
Which means he's grandstanding, so.
yeah. Your group is frequently referred to as the group.
Yes.
And the only two folks that are named are Mr. Ruffin and Ms. Cook.
Right.
I have been aware over time of a different group, and some of its members live in very, very close proximity to the library. So one thing that would, and I think it would help a portion of this conversation, is we're talking about the neighbors, and I know some of those neighbors had been formerly part of a group that was advocating for it to stay at One Lime Rock. And so I'm curious when or if the membership of this group may become public, or is that something that we will never actually see? Because if it was a decent overlap between the group that I'm thinking and the group that currently exists that's working on this, then I could immediately name two folks that are in close proximity that obviously wouldn't have any issues with it because they're actively working on this project.
Answer the question.
Oh, I would look to your attorney if I were you, sir.
I think the problem is this, it's a chicken and egg problem. If you, like I said, we have a problem of raising money. And it's really hard to go to approach someone and say, wait, I'm not gonna show you anything. I just want you to give us some money for this piece of property, and I'm not gonna show you anything. It's almost impossible to raise money that way, or to get people into your group. So we talk to people, you know, we have some people interested, but until we know the library's gonna go there, and you're gonna be using it part of for the building, then it's gonna be, in some concept, what it's gonna look like, it'd be impossible for us to go to someone in a serious manner and say, we'd like you to donate a substantial sum of money. Without that information, it is just, you know, it's just something you wouldn't do.
You've already raised a third of it. You've already raised a third of it.
Oh, and let me ask that question differently. How does it benefit the public broadly? You know, and we're going to have to make our own determination about whether or not we think this proposal is in the public interest.
Right.
How is the public interest furthered by having a bunch of specific names who?
Because of transparency, I mean, I could paint some ridiculous scenarios for you that one of the investors in this group works for the Kremlin, and that their money is directly tied to Vladimir Putin. That's a ridiculous scenario, obviously, but not knowing exactly who the folks are, what their reasoning or
But Owen,
rationale
this is a private group.
It's now operating in the public sphere.
Well, I mean, you
Not
know,
until
it's
it gets turned over to
No,
us.
they
and then they're out.
could create a limited liability corp, they could hand you a single check, you'd never know, and
Yep.
why do you care?
Because I just personally would be a little, I would feel it somewhat awkward to accept a large sum of money from a group I had no clue who those people were.
What's the concern, aside from ill-gotten goods?
In my life, attempt to ramp up transparency. It's just my thing. It's just a personal thing. And again, I feel very comfortable with this situation that there's no money from the Kremlin. But it's just, it's a curiosity thing.
Sally,
But how do I know?
I feel like I must say something.
Please do.
The group is Nick and me. And the list that you were given at the last meeting of the
pro bono.
pro bono local people, that's it. That's the group. We have a professional fundraiser who's done most of her life fundraising for nonprofits, who's also helping us pro bono if and when we start extending
Thank you, Sally.
fundraising. But
Thank you very
that's the
much.
group.
And you're right, there are two groups, but there's a certain overlap between them as well.
Which I was just kind of,
The other comment I would make is that, you weren't at the meeting the other night, but if you've gone through all of the live stream, you will have seen that, the immediate neighbors have already weighed in at least once
Yes.
on the project. And it's interesting because, conversations were held with one of the neighbors before that meeting in an effort to, alleviate some of their concerns. But, they obviously continue to have some, and I would expect that.
Yeah, in a way, Owen, this is no different from what the capital campaign would have been. Some people would want to have their names known, others want to make the donation anonymous. In either case, unless it's specifically stated that there's a string attached, it's anonymous.
thank you for indulging me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do we need to have a conversation amongst ourselves about this? I think we've gotten
Yeah, I
the
think
information
you
we
all-
need from Alex and Peter, and Paul and Steve. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Always have to leave behind.
There you go.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I guess I don't understand how they expanded.
Oh, yeah.
I was looking at the
That's just the way.
tax and stuff before I came.
Yeah,
Terry, you
what,
awake?
just so you know, with that agreement, if we went out to the full extent of the 6 months, we have a $5,000 we put down, and that $5,000 is lost. Doesn't credit towards the purchase price. If I put it in there, that if we were to find out real early that we weren't gonna do this, we could get some credit, some of that money back.
$880 a
But my
month.
point is that at this stage, we need to know an answer, I think. And with the answer, we can decide what we want to do. But hopefully, we're hoping that you'll adopt our proposal. That's what we hope.
Well, I would reiterate that the answer is going to come in several stages, and if this board decides to put the library at One Lime Rock, or make that proposal anyway, then there's a zoning issue that has to be resolved.
But as you and I both know, that issue is not difficult.
Well, from getting it on the ballot, it's not
Yeah, yeah,
difficult,
exactly,
yes, but
right.
but it will, I mean, those who are opposed to it will grab onto that, and it may be a more difficult vote. So I guess my only point is that even if we make a decision on One Lime Rock next week, and then a month later, we make a decision that, yes, we'd like to go into this agreement, it may be a longer period of time before we have finality with it. It's the zoning issue, because of the zoning issue.
Do you see it likely that we would, if this board were to vote for One Lime Rock, that we would, in a different occasion, incorporate or not incorporate the Scott property? Wouldn't that be part of the decision of going to One Lime Rock?
Can you ask that question again? I didn't follow it. I don't think.
The answer is, for me, is not necessarily.
So Ken set up a situation where we would decide to go to One Lime Rock, and then at a later meeting, his mythical 2 weeks later, we would decide to consider accepting or rejecting the Scott offer, the Scott property.
And you're asking whether that strikes you as or strikes us as plausible?
No, why wouldn't it be talked about all at once and come up with one solution?
I think that the process that we set out to do, which didn't include this new property at the outset, I think we have to finish that process.
Agreed.
We can't assume, I mean, the other possibility is that they can't raise the money. We can't assume that the money is all gonna be there. So I think we have to make our decision, to some extent, assuming that the 3 Lime Rock property will not be available. Because it might not be.
Well, Ken, I guess the question then becomes, let's suppose for argument's sake, as was addressed in the presentation from the 15th, that a good portion of, in fact, most of, but not necessarily all of, the funds are raised, leaving a residue of a relatively modest amount by comparison with what the town was prepared to pay for this property a year ago, or what was committed to in the contract. Are you saying by inference that at that point, the town would walk away from it despite the relatively modest commitment that might be required?
I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm saying that, and if it is a modest amount, that makes our decision easier.
Of course.
But we don't know that it will be, I
No,
guess.
I agree.
And so I guess my only point is not necessarily to get into that, but to answer Paul's question is that in 2 weeks, we aren't going to be able to tell you that this whole thing is going to go on. We may be able to tell you we've selected the one Lime Rock site, and then at some later time, we may be able to say we've vetted this proposal and we accept the proposal. But until the voters change the zoning, we can't.
Here's how I anticipated it working myself. I anticipated that you would accept our proposal in theory, and you would say, you know, we're gonna do this, we're going to have the volunteers have a design, and if the voters approve it, you'll hire those people to design this building. That's what I assumed. The second thing I assumed was that because we need to raise money fast, we believed that we'd have to come back to you sometime in April with hopefully raising most of that money. That's how I anticipated this timeline would work. And if I raised all the money and most of the money by April, then all of a sudden, you could be able, you know, Mr. Gravity will take you the rest of the way. So that's what I thought that's what we thought we were able to do, and we do still think we may be able to do that. So that's what our timeline looked like. If without a concept drawing, without at least an opinion that the board is gonna go on one Lime Rock Street, imagine how it's like to try to raise money for something.
Oh, I understand. I totally understand. I'm just
That makes
saying that
perfect
it's a multi-step process for us.
But what's the problem with us making first the decision whether we go to RES or One Lime Rock? And then if we decide to go to One Lime Rock, why can't we turn right around and make the decision to accept the offer or reject it?
I think, well, let's go to the abstract the other way. I think if we make a decision to go to One Lime Rock, I believe we have to make the decision that we want the library there on the current site. Because let's say that we'd make the decision to go to One Lime Rock, and then the group comes back and says, well, you know, we couldn't raise the 450,000, we could only raise 200,000, leaving more than a trivial amount. Then we've made that decision to go on One Lime Rock, and at that point we have to, so I think we have to be able to justify the decision to going to One Lime Rock, not necessarily assuming that this property will be available. If it's available and if we decide to use it, terrific.
And that's the point. We make the decision first on which site to choose.
That's right.
Then decide if we want to try to add this on, remembering that we can still get to June and the voters turn it down.
I understand that, and then the June is another conversation. But my only point is that we have to be able to make a decision on the two sites as they stand right now, in my
Yes.
opinion,
Yes. And that's what I just said.
Can I make one comment? First of all, as Bill knows and Jeff, you know, our hope had been that the decision as to what site the library was going to be built on would have been made before we ever made our presentation. If it were not for the weather, that would have been the case, or might have been the case. The second thing is, Ken, with all due respect, I think Bill's got it right for this reason, that we can't do anything until such time as we have an answer from the select board as to whether or not they're willing to accept this offer. And the longer that discussion goes on, the more difficult it becomes.
So let me actually, and I don't mean to make fun of the situation, but where we might be comfortable in, and we got to discuss it, is 20% chance of showers. Do we bring our raincoats? That obviously everybody's pushing. I mean, the kind of money that people are putting in to get this far certainly seems to indicate that they are going to do, as the group grows and grows, they are going to do all they can to protect that time and investment, and it's in their best interest to tie this little bow up in a 457, thank you, little bow and have it done with. So we can write the same kind of summary and then contract that says, if you've done this by this, we'll certainly do that. If you haven't been able to do that by that, and we can break it down, because this board will have to, if push comes to shove, this board will have to figure out what's a palatable number for heretofore unspent taxpayers' money. I mean, because the first go-around, we weren't talking about taxpayers' money to enlarge the foundation of the property, the basis of the property. But I submit to you that the ladies and gentlemen who are putting up money have a significant internal, clock.
Well, I don't
to,
dispute that at all.
To do that.
Let me put it a different way. If this board chooses the One Lime Rock site, in my opinion, then we have to be comfortable with using only the One Lime Rock site, should this proposal not come to fruition for whatever reason.
So, I mean, I don't mind saying personally that as long as we see this process through and make these decisions in the responsible way with all of the information that we said we were going to collect, this is an interesting proposal to me. It's not, it doesn't, to me, it's difficult for me to imagine a situation where this would be the decision, the thing that shifted my decision to One Lime Rock, that without this.
And I guess that's my point.
So that's just me personally, but I'm happy saying that.
That's my
I'd
point.
like for us to finish this process that we started, but I don't envision this being the one thing
This
that
isn't the
makes it
super-
responsible to go to One Lime Rock.
Steve, yeah.
To answer Ken's question, which is a good one, as to if you get to April and you haven't raised the money, then what do you do? There could be an option in the design process where the building that's being designed, depending on how it's located on the site, could be slid in either direction. So if, in fact, you've gone through the process where we spent 2 months designing a building for that site, but we have two options in terms of its siting, then you haven't lost the time, because you haven't paid for the time, but you haven't lost the option of if in fact you've approved a building on that site, it would have two locations or two design options that would work either on the 3 Lime Rock or on the 1 Lime Rock. So if you had to, as your fail-safe project, and you said, we're interested in reviewing the 3 Lime Rock as a proposal, but if that money can't be raised, then you have the option of, you've already decided that you want to go in town in the Lime Rock Street, so that design, that would be your option too. You can just say, okay, we want to abandon the whole thing. Or we have two options as far as the siting of this building that would work on either site.
So we very nearly approved a proposal that did not involve this at all.
Right.
Is it your position that couldn't happen, or that?
What, that we couldn't approve a
Yeah, I mean, it seems,
One Lime Rock?
it seems to me as though we almost did it before. We've identified some serious problems that need to be addressed.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think we could. And that's actually is my point, is that, right now we're choosing between RES and 1 Lime Rock. And I think, the fact that 3 Lime Rock is out there and possibly available is a consideration, but not the overwhelming
I
consideration.
mean, it does further complicate any kind of a head-to-head comparison. I mean, it does do that.
Gentlemen, excuse me, do you need us anymore?
I think you've answered all we could ask you to answer, so.
Well, I'm always happy to answer more, but I just want to make sure that I'm not standing here for no good reason.
I do want
That's
to
a
make
good reason.
one point on the 3 Lime Rock property, that if we do not accept this and it does not become part of it and this all goes to a vote, if instead 3 Lime Rock remains its own property, there is no guarantee that that house is going to remain there,
Well, there certainly is.
for more than a week after it gets sold to somebody else.
Right.
Absolutely
There is
correct.
no, look at what happened over here in the Ingram's place.
And at that point, you know, we don't have architectural standards. We have no,
Right.
no control over what it looks like. And, you know, and my understanding, actually, one of the things you can do while you're talking there, or Steve or somebody might, is my understanding is that rubble foundation, not in great shape. It's a house that's been ridden hard and put up wet. And that is not quite the paragon of the 1850s that other people might think it is.
I'm not going to comment on that because I have my own personal views on the subject and I've made them known in private, but I'd rather not make them known in public.
Okay.
But I'm not going to disagree with you. Let's put it that way.
I have one final question for the group, if I could. And I don't, this may take a holistic answer. So say we were to make a decision, not tonight because we can't, but next week, that we are not shooting for the June ballot, but we are still very interested in the proposal that you all have and retaining your services and trying to make the One Lime Rock site a great viable thing. We just want to have a little more time. What does that do?
They've already talked
I
about
think
that.
they've spoken
Yeah,
about
we've
that.
already talked, we've already answered that to a degree.
There's another party to this.
Yeah,
to
that-
this agreement
I
that-
understand that, and I know, and that's an unknown, but
actually-
let's pay just best case scenario that the Scots, because of a lot of support from the select board or all kinds of different reasons, are very open and amenable to the idea of extending that. Is that a prohibiting factor for you all to remain cheery and upbeat, or?
I don't think so. No, I mean, it's only a question of the moving parts that come into play at that point in time.
And there's a huge one with the Scots, and that's a
Exactly.
very, very valid
Yeah,
point.
and the other thing I think, and I have said this before in conversations with different parties, the one thing that concerns me more, I think, than anything else about delaying till November is the loss of momentum and the loss of enthusiasm. There's a lot of time between now and November and a lot of things that would intervene. Now, I understand the other side of that discussion, that, you know, we want to make sure that we have the right project, we want to make sure that it has the right curb appeal, we want to make sure that the opportunity for people to understand it has taken advantage of. So, again, without meaning to be ducking the issue, I think that's going to end up being in your purview, obviously. But if it's feasible to go in June, I would recommend going in June. But you have to decide whether it's feasible or not.
There's some things that I think common sense would
Bill.
tell you about situations of extending this agreement. We know for a fact that this property was placed by the parties on the open market for much more money than its assessed value. It took a long time for us to get that agreement. We were able to convince them of that agreement for 6 months because they knew that either in June or July, it would be all over, one way or the other. The highest season for selling properties is the summertime. Someone could argue that they might be able to get higher values in the summertime, and that's why that ends in 6 months. So it's not gonna be an easy thing to do. I mean, it just isn't that.
It's understood.
It's not us, you know, it's, like, we wanna make it work,
Yeah.
we could.
Yeah.
But it's just, if you looked at it from the, and they have everybody, I'm not trying to, publicly not trying to criticize Scots at any degree, they just have all the rights to their property. It'll make it much more difficult.
Jeff?
I'm gonna ask one, and Jeff, yeah.
So, one of the things that I appreciate through this whole process is that you have indicated a significant desire to work very closely with this board to take the right steps, make the right design decisions, present it in a way that's approachable for the town. Have you guys given any thought to whether that is a subcommittee of 2 of us or all 5 at each of these meetings? It's a serious thought
I
because
think, I would expect, this is just my expectation, that this board would do what it's done with most other groups in town, in mostly standing committees, that there'd be either 1 or 2 select board members who would work with the group. That's just my assessment, but I think it's less cumbersome if that's the case.
And better
Because,
for
you know, we're gonna have.
schedule flexibility.
We're gonna have the professionals, we're gonna have Ben. Excuse me, we're gonna have Ben. And then we're gonna have some number of select board members, and at a certain point, and it's possible, we'd also have the town manager. So at a certain point, you know, it gets a little cumbersome. And so I just think that's my expectation, and that's the rationale behind it.
And given the compressed timeline, those would be fairly frequent
Intense.
meetings, intense.
What are the previous projects that would serve as precedent for having the town manager do that?
That's your decision.
I'm really just asking. I don't have the context.
I'm
The ad
just-
hoc library committee, he sat in as a non-voting
I
member.
was not a,
Yeah, the
I
thing-
haven't been a voting member on the steering committee or the ad hoc library planning committee, which is fine. I don't need to be a voting member of a committee.
I fully appreciate the too many cooks in the kitchen concept. That also strikes me as problematic to have only one of us.
Yeah, we would like to avoid designing a camel if we can,
Right.
yes.
Well, as Monty Python said, I want a shrubbery.
Can we allow Alex to sit down?
Yes. Thank you, Alex.
Thank
He's
you,
got his
Alex.
coat in his hand, he's not gonna sit down.
Or leave
Thank
us,
you for coming in.
leave us to our.
Oh, wait. No, just joking.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
thank you. So, what do we want to say before we say we're gonna get together on the 28th to take a vote, or hopefully take a vote?
28th is a Tuesday.
Tuesday.
27th is a regular meeting Monday.
Yes.
From which we hear lots of people.
Well,
Or
on
is it
Monday, we want to deal with the other business, most of which was left over from the 13th when we
When we
got
did
snowed
have
out.
snowstorms.
And,
Non-library meeting.
yeah, it's a
So-
non-library meeting, and we will ask that any public comment related to the library come on Tuesday.
Okay,
Because that's when we're gonna hear the public comment.
I advised somebody wrongly, and I'll have to shift it a day in there.
Would you please?
So 23rd, Tuesday,
No,
28th.
Eighth.
Week from tonight.
a week from tonight,
Tuesday, we hear from people.
we have public comment, then we go into our consideration
Right.
Is that a workshop or a meeting?
meeting.
Has to be a meeting.
That's why I
Yeah,
asked.
I've already said it's gonna be a meeting. Okay?
Do we directly respond to heartfelt questions in the Q&A in the comments section, or do we let them divine it from, hey, that's a good idea, let's bring that up when we're talking amongst ourselves? Or do we just listen and then proceed?
Well, we've been giving everybody plenty of time to ask questions.
Well, in the last 4 meetings, we've been asking them to ask questions in question form rather than giving their opinion. Presumably, next Tuesday, it will be opinions.
Have we gotten anything through Rick's computer?
No, nothing
Now, there were
tonight.
20, how
I
many
might
people?
suggest, I mean,
27
I
at
thought
the
we
high.
would get to this tonight, but I don't know that I want to stay much later.
It's only 10 o'clock.
You know, we have to, at some point, we have to start expressing our own opinions. We've done a little bit of that tonight, but only scratched the surface, I think. And I don't know whether we want to stay and do that now, or if not, then next Tuesday, I would suggest that the first part of the meeting be us expressing our opinions and thinking, you know, letting the people know which way we're gonna go with this, and then have some limited period of public comment, and then perhaps respond to that and vote.
You got one cringe behind you.
Yeah,
I just, I think if we have public comment in the beginning, it's gonna be long, there's no question about that, and we wanna hear from the public, it's not that, but I don't feel like we've had our discussion amongst ourselves yet, and I think that it might be wise to have that before we have public comment, and then, you know, the public is then gonna know probably which way we're leaning when they make their comments, and maybe their comments will change, or maybe they'll try to change their
But
mind. I don't know.
then, from a human being standpoint, what a human being normally does is, once they go intractable, somebody there could talk to you until they're blue in the face, and they're not gonna see a change in you. And the hope is that and the design is that their input, while different from the Board of Experts, is as important to us to work into our own individual matrices. And if we've already said, you know, I vote green, it either truncates that or just elevates it
Well, do we want to have a brief discussion then tonight about how we view each of the sites?
So, well, I mean, I still want to get to the bottom of whether or not we have completed our due diligence.
And that was actually going to be my
And
question
diligence
before we
what?
closed out. By the
Have we looked at
process
it?
setters,
Well, there
have
are
we
some things
followed
that are
our
still hanging
process?
out there.
So, I mean, let me just ask you a question.
Right.
We told people at the beginning of this process that we would not only make a decision about where the library was gonna go, but also make a decision about what the board wanted to see happen at the other site. Have we gathered the necessary
I don't
information?
remember us saying that we would make a decision about what was to be happening at the other site.
well, not to that specificity, but we had to discuss, with confidence, I think the expression at that point was what would happen to the other site. Not that it would look exactly like this, but, so if we were to,
Thank you for coming.
if we were to use the RES site, what do we envision? And we need to talk about that. And, you know,
30,000-foot view.
and if we use the Lime Rock site, what do we envision for RES? So I think that because that is very much part of some of us, our decision-making process.
I mean, we issued an instruction to the town manager to go and find out whether or not the Bach family is conceptually amenable to not putting a library on Lime Rock.
Yeah, we're
and
waiting
having
for
the town-
that.
And having the town
Yeah,
keep the property. Is your expectation that we're gonna have an answer to that by the time we take this vote?
Judging from what I heard from town, the only thing is if we sent out something like you were just saying, if we get a response back from one or more of the heirs that says, well, no, I'd like to talk about keeping that
So
property.
the question I'm asking is, are you guys comfortable making this vote without having the answer to that question?
well, that's
Well, I think
gonna-
we wanna have a-
having an answer to that question is gonna take a year.
No,
Could easily take a year if we're gonna have to drill down to
I think what we're
everybody.
trying to get is a sense, the best sense that we can
Right.
get of the people that we can reach.
Right.
Yeah.
And they may be able to tell us, obviously not with clarity, but they may be able to give us information about the people that we can't reach, about so-and-so in California or so-and-so in some other part of the country, that they may have an interest or they may not. It's not gonna be binding, but it does give us another piece of information.
I think either tea and coffee with those family members, I'll talk into the microphone, either tea and coffee with those family members that are available this Friday or Saturday, and a conversation and phone calls to others. I think we can get to half of them, albeit in an informal way, but have an indication. And then if there's somebody that digs in their heels, we know. But not knowing anything and making a presumption is a bad way to go. And I agree with Brendan that we owe the process the clarity of what's the possibility for the non-chosen site.
Well, remember, Charlton made a comment at the close of the presentation by the Capital Campaign Committee, is not get wrapped up or don't worry about if it has to revert. It's not the end of the world if it does revert. And so that
It's a
decision should be
consideration,
made.
though.
There's no problem with that decision, but that is a decision.
Yeah.
And it's one that we haven't made.
Right.
So
That's what we're gonna make next Tuesday.
so to me.
One or the other. The other says that we're not gonna immediately do anything with the other site. Well,
But
There's no reason, if we're being honest about this process, there's no reason that we can't have a frank conversation that involves an if-then concept.
it's an element of our decision-making, much
If-
like all the other stuff.
If Lime Rock, what does that mean for RES? If RES, what does that mean for Lime Rock? I submit to you, we don't have the information with which to make a responsible determination of that right now. perhaps,
On either side.
I don't
If
think
you're
we have it
saying
on
then
either
that we
side.
need to know if we say One Lime Rock, then we have to have a definitive plan in place for what to do with that whole site? That's that comprehensive plan or master plan for the area. That's gonna take a long time
No,
to
no,
do.
it's an outline. At this point in time,
3,000 foot.
yeah, it's, at this point in time, this is what we feel would be an appropriate next 100 steps for that property.
I believe that we told the public we were gonna do this. You're free to disagree with me, but I believe that that's what we said we were gonna do as part of this process.
I think we said that we would discuss it. I don't know how deep into the specifics we said we would get.
So
I mean, I don't,
how deep into the specifics can you get without knowing whether or not we're allowed to keep the property?
well, yeah, that's a piece of information we need. There's no question about that. But if it goes the other way, in other words, I don't think we can have a plan, a full master plan for the RES site done, should we choose One Lime Rock.
Nobody's asking for that, but what.
I mean, we can have a
what
discussion
an
about it.
appropriate reply would be we should create a body and execute a long-term master plan, either with, working hand in hand with the new property owners, or independently of them. I would say with them. But that could be, and then comma, so that in the end, RES site does this for the town, whatever X is.
I mean,
And is that enough of a?
that would be enough for me. I mean,
Right.
to me, not even engaging those individuals to find out whether or not the concept of a library is amenable to what they hope for, the larger picture that they have in mind. It's difficult for me to look somebody in the eye and say that we made an honest effort to define what a library at RES would have looked like.
So I think on that particular matter, both of us have spoken with Taylor a bit, and both of us have gotten a response. And it feels as though you would rather not represent them in their absence.
They asked to speak to us.
No, no, I get
We're
that.
the
I
ones who
get
have
that.
prevented this
No, no.
conversation.
Well, wait,
from
hang on a
happening.
minute now.
Wait.
Because I did reach out to Taylor, and I said I'd like to meet with him, and the decision was made because Stewart was out of the country.
Right.
It would be best to wait for him to return.
Right, so, I agree, absolutely.
And
So-
so, and I think we have to be really, really careful about this situation. And I'd hope not to have this discussion in public, actually, but I feel like I have to now. We have to be careful of the perception that we're talking to a developer who may have a vested interest in either having or not having a library at that site. And we have to be very careful of the perception that that colors our decision. I think we have to make the decision based on the merits of the site as we've been talked to by the professionals. I don't want to make a decision based on some possible, a developer's wants, needs, or desires, or even vision, to use it that way. I think we have to be really, really careful about that.
I respect that
I would-
determination.
I have a slightly different concern. Here we have developers approaching the select board to get the select board's buy-in to their plan, so that when
And
they.
guidance.
Well, and guidance, but what happens when they go to the planning board and the planning board says, well, what you talked to the select board and sort of got their buy-in on isn't permitted by our land use ordinances.
So one of two things, you don't go to the select board, you don't go to the zoning board with something, or the planning board with something that won't fly, A, or B, it's important enough that this body goes to the ORC and suggests a change and you vote on it.
I also don't think that that's what was requested.
No,
My
all-
impression is that what was requested was for us to help facilitate a community conversation about community needs.
Right.
And I'm happy to do that. My question is the appropriate time.
Well, I think an initial conversation is important, and the question is it done, should we, when does Stewart and Marianne and Tyler get
I
back?
don't know.
So should we invite,
Eighth.
what, eighth?
when I checked, it was, they had said to me March 8th.
Should we invite Martha and Taylor to next week's meeting?
I had the same conversation that Ken had, that, you know, the preference would
Bless
be
you.
that the largest percentage of their group would be available to talk with us. So I'm happy to be outvoted or overruled. We're not voting tonight at all, and I appreciate Ken's position. To me, I have a hard time saying that I did what I said we were gonna do unless we make an effort to provide a little more specificity to what a library on the RES would or could look like.
Owen?
And generally speaking, Ken, I would agree with you. I just want to point out the irony of your comment, because over the course of the last 2 weeks or so, we have had a group of folks.
Not developers, though.
Well, just minus the fact that they want to build something on it. This is still this is a group of individuals who have approached the select board with a potential possibility, and that we have given them ample amounts of time to make presentations to us that I think you would be hard pressed to say has not influenced part of our decision making, and where we have a not identical or we have a similar-ish potential or possibility for folks that want to do things at a different site that our project may play into, to preclude them from passing along information that would be applicable to our decision-making.
And that's another reason why I said that I think we have to make our decision based on the One Lime Rock site as it stands and the RES site.
I'm just saying, for me personally, and I think that I've been pretty open with other members of this board before even it became public knowledge about the Scott property, it's very difficult for me to isolate things. It's very difficult for me to unhear the things that I've heard.
I agree.
And so they will, the Smiths and things that are going to be happening in and around the RES site will go into my decision-making. The proposals and presentations by this group will go into my decision-making. I have a difficult time isolating those
Okay,
things.
so in other words, you would prefer us to defer any decision until after the Smiths have returned on March 8th, so that we can meet with them to hear what their proposals might be and how the use of the RES site, with or without a library, may play into theirs, so that then we can compare 1 Lime Rock and 3 Lime Rock versus RES and the rest of Route 1. Is that what you're saying?
All things being equal, yes. I would say that all things in this case aren't necessarily equal. Timelines and things like that do kind of add to the complexity. But yes, all things being equal, two groups that have potentials that have to relate to the two separate sites that we're evaluating, if we were to fully follow through on our process of an unbiased evaluation of both sites with those potentials being out there, yes, I would like to hear from that group about what they want to do and see how our potential project could play into their potential development.
It may not be able to.
And I would like to hear that from them before making a
I
decision.
think all of the experts we spoke to had the same counsel with respect to RES. Would you guys agree that we heard, don't build a standalone building without thinking through what else goes there?
Who knows if they're gonna show up and say, you know what, we wanna buy half of that RES site, you can keep the ball fields. We'll give you for the rest of time and all eternity space to put a 2-story library, as long as you build it here, and here's your square footage parameters, and then we're gonna develop everything else around it. And you can keep that library there.
Which even that we couldn't do without taking it to the public.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean,
Right, we can't do anything without taking it to the public. But with lacking that knowledge by the process that you all kind of laid out, maybe I'm adding to the
I
process.
just want to be able to look all the members of the public in the eye and say, I was comparing this to this.
So why don't we Skype in those folks that are away to the beginning of the meeting, our Tuesday meeting, and we get it, either it's 3 minutes or it's 60 minutes. But we've given them a chance to tell us where their thinking is at this point, and then we go and decide what to do with that, with the benefit of their thinking at this point in time.
So we have them Skype in, then we
Ken, I
take
have a
public
huge
comment,
amount of
then we do
respect
our
for you. If you have
discussion.
reservations,
I got big reservations. I think the two situations are not compatible. On the one hand, you have a group of people wishing to buy land and donate it to the town for no personal gain for themselves at all. On the other hand, you have well-meaning developers who have been very good to the town, but they're looking to develop property.
I agree with you.
They're looking to develop property to further their businesses and things like that. It's a totally different situation. I think that,
So in English, you would rather we don't even entertain them with respect to the library and we.
I would rather get
take
the
up-
library decision made and then talk to them. We can talk in the abstract about the development of the RES property. I'm perfectly happy to do that, to talk about, you know, what in a 30,000-foot vision level we might see there, should we choose not to place the library there. I'm perfectly happy to have that discussion, but I think involving a developer, and I know Taylor very well, and Stewart also, and I respect them, and it's nothing to do with them personally, but I think involving a developer is a very different situation than the possible donation of land that we've been.
Well,
And if we choose to put it at RES, doesn't preclude other things going on there at the same time. One of the things they asked in the email that I got included, well, you know, what do you want to do with that? And is there going to be a library there, or is it going to be for sale, or what? You know, these are longer range questions, and just having them in for, 5 or 10 or 15 minutes of a Skype conversation isn't going to be able to explore in depth all of those
But it
plans.
goes from 0 to 1 at least, because we are at totally 0 on trusted allies of the town who are doing something in that neck of the woods. And, and quite frankly, I think they're at step 1 of 100 steps. But even if there was 22 steps down the road of 100 steps, in the end, I think it's going to be too long before a library will be on that site, would be in the temporary site for too long, and we would vote against it for that reason. But having absolutely no concept of what's in their heads, is that responsible?
Ken, I see your point. It's information I'd like to have, but I'm not going to try and change your mind.
cricket.
So,
Heads or tails?
And I see where you're coming from, Ken. It's one of those things to where
let me be-
if there's information out there
There's the
that
prospect for
applies
financial gain.
to
I mean,
our
it's a big
project,
difference.
Yeah, and I'm excited about their potential development of those. I really am, and I told Taylor so. But I think it's inappropriate for us to bring it into this discussion at this time. I just do.
To me, in light of what we heard from the experts, juxtaposed with what I happened to have heard, a group of people thinking about, it seems peculiar to me that we wouldn't, look further.
And I suppose one of the other things in the back of my head is, I have my own personal opinions about maybe where the site would go. That's part of, I think, my job. Where was I going with that? Where were you going with that, Owen?
I have no idea.
Oh, I remember what it was. But as part of going through this process, I've really been attempting to, whenever possible, ask the same question about the RES site that I do the Lime Rock. And always try to have it be balanced. And though I do fully respect that it is a different group of people with different end goals, I think that it would play into our equal and even process.
Let me describe.
Simply using the terms of potential. This group has offered a potential, that other group has a potential. They're two separate groups, but they both have potential.
in which case, if we want to hear from the other group, we are saying no to 3 Lime Rock.
I don't see how
Just
that's
listening,
the
we're
case.
saying no to 3 Lime Rock?
I don't agree with that.
Well, we can't make a decision which way to go until we've heard from from the Allen Smith group.
I guess I apologize, I'm not following the
Well-
reasoning.
Well, they may say something that makes it very easy for us to say, okay, we're back to exactly Ken's thing, it has to stand on its own. So, by the way, what's happening on the intertubes is that folks are following along in this particular thing, and
folks.
Heather has suggested that we have public input next Tuesday, have a vote a week later.
Is that Heather Mackey?
I have no idea. Once Bach info is known and informal meeting with Route 1 developers has been had. I maintain we could actually do that prior to a week before, after that meeting. But, so she says, get the information. Joe Sterno says, Stanowski, that's his shortened, who was right there. If the select board speaks to the box, they would need to offer some alternatives regarding the use of the land if it is not used for a library. That's a good point. That our question to the box is not as simple as, do you want it back if we don't use it for a library? We need to come up with some suggestions as to what we would do with it. Just to give them an idea.
Well, I think we owe that to the public as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then Susan says, I'd like to hear the public to hear the Smiths' ideas for the town. Thank you.
Where are we at, Bill?
The potential for financial conflict is real. It's absolutely real.
Or
But
financial conflict.
with private developers asking these kinds of questions, I mean, I just want to hear. It's difficult to accept that less information is better.
There comes a point where going down the road on getting more information, it's the old analysis
there's
paralysis.
diminishing
You just
returns.
keep thinking, oh, we need to have a little more. We have a 15-minute conversation via Skype with them will lead to more questions about, well, oh, we need to talk about and think about this a little bit more, and then we need to think about this a little bit more as we explore what their alternatives are for the area that may lead into our discussion whether we want to take the library there or keep it at One Lime Rock. There comes a point where we've got to say, we've got to make this decision now if we are going to get it on a ballot.
So this is actually a pretty simple question. Do you or do you not have the information that you said you were going to gather when we started this process?
For what I thought we were going in to gather, yes.
We are waiting for the Bach deed information.
So your feeling is once you have that,
Once we have that, I think we're also waiting for the information about the number of houses within the radii of the two sites, which we had asked for. And then I think we do.
No, I think we're missing out on an important component, if nothing else, to hear their plans, which may have nothing to do with the library.
The memo they sent had library included on, what might happen if you put a library on
It was
residence.
a list of things they wanted to
Yeah,
talk about, that's all it
right.
was.
And it was a
is
fairly
this
long
inappropriate
list.
to be doing here? Because it feels a little bit like a vote, but,
No,
so I argue no, that we haven't collected the information that we told the public that we're going to collect.
Second.
Can't use that.
well,
Well, then on Tuesday, we'll have a further discussion about that, and we can decide not to vote on Tuesday. That's our purview.
Is there public comment on Tuesday?
yes.
That's mostly what it is. Well, it's half an hour.
I was just curious if maybe
Skype
almost
maybe.
Tyler and Taylor showed up and utilized their
They're-
3 minutes of
They're
public
perfectly
comment
welcome to do that.
to.
I would totally defer to them about whether or not we need to wait for other members. I mean, if this can all be dealt with in 4 minutes, that would be fantastic.
Tyler's also out of town, or otherwise.
Tyler is
Don't have
too.
to.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's in
he's in
Hawaii or
Hawaii as
something.
well. Or he was.
Not that this is a small town and everybody knows where everybody is. And he hides the key under the mat.
I mean, so
I even lock my doors.
public buy-in to this process is critically important
Right.
to whether or not our decision is supported and accepted as valid.
And if we were to lose 100 votes just of confidence because we didn't at least examine that particular scenario.
I'm telling you, we might lose my vote.
Yeah, 101.
But I would submit that votes could swing the other way too. If there's a perception that we have allowed
Cut a
a
deal?
commercial
Yeah.
developer to influence our process. I think we could lose votes that way too.
Yeah, I hear that. Is that something that we think we might be able to get to the bottom of, either amongst discussion with each other or by hearing from the public about whether or not that perception exists?
I think we'll find out at public comment
Well,
next Tuesday. quite
We
honestly.
don't have the time to do something that, to the extent that is gonna involve any, loss of public trust. It's either gonna be, yes, we are very, very interested in having a library, and we're interested in doing something around the library. That informs us one way. Or, no, you know what, put the library either way. We have a passing interest in the RES site. What we want is, for the select board to help us on a townwide buy-in of the whole concept from here to there. I mean, those are the ranges of the answers, and none of them have a potential for graft greed or anything else, because, again, it falls in, it works into your system of RES standalone. But from a design standpoint, why don't we pull in its wings a little bit and set it over here, because this could happen around it, which is good planning anyway.
But what if they come to us and they say, we'd really like to buy the RES site and we'll give you a pile of money for it? What happens then?
Can I ask, and I'm happy to be stood corrected, I've sat in this room with private developers there when we've had conversations to where they are trying to influence us to change zoning, to allow non-conforming things, to rewrite language for around mini stinking storages. The only thing that I view as different is that we would be requesting that they came to give us a presentation versus them, but they've actually already
Well, I think
requested.
the difference is that that's a decision that we make impacting, land use ordinances for this is impacting a different
Ken,
decision.
the other day, we asked for, in an effort to try and quantify the opportunity cost of putting the library on One Lime Rock.
That's for Kerry.
We asked for Kerry to give us an assessment of the,
That's correct.
and we have a number, and right now, that number is sort of part of the public record. You just raised the scenario where somebody might come in and say, I'll give you $1 million for that piece of property. Isn't that part of defining the opportunity cost?
I think the difference is that what we got from Kerry the other day was an abstract thing. It was, this could possibly help under the right circumstances.
Highest and best
If
use.
we have, not even necessarily highest and best use, but I'm just really concerned about the possibility that and I don't know whether they would do it or not, they probably wouldn't, but I'm just concerned about the possibility that there's a perception from the public that a developer comes in and says, we'll buy the RES property for a large sum of money, and that colors our decision. And I think if that happens, then we're in trouble as far as the voters are concerned. Then talk about our process there goes right out the window. Because now we're not evaluating the two sites based on the merits. We're evaluating the two sites based on, we can get a lot of money for this site, and we can build over at this site. That's what I'm really concerned about.
I feel like our process has already been, and no offense to your group at all, it's very well intended, but their proposal was not what we were talking about in the very beginning.
I understand, but
And they've colored my opinion.
it's another factor that we have to consider. There's no question about that. But the difference is, as I said before, is that there is no commercial gain for that
And
group.
that is a meaningful difference.
Yep, no.
Where there is a possible
Can't take
commercial
that
gain
one
for
from
the other
them.
developers.
So I think we've talked about this enough
Yeah,
that
we
we have to, at least invite those, Taylor, et cetera, to the public's comment part of the next meeting.
Well, they're members of the public. They're welcome to come. I would
Well-
say, I would not invite them, but I would say, they're members, they're perfectly welcome to come and make a public comment about what they're doing if they would like to. I would rather do it that way than issue a formal
you-
invitation.
You want them to
Well,
learn about this by
I would,
osmosis?
I would put it this way.
And-
If they
I
want,
think they'll know about it.
if they want,
Bless you.
we could provide for them the same way we provided for this group and give them a block of time at the beginning of the meeting. Probably because, to be fair about it, before public comment.
I was under the impression for exactly this reason, that they were gonna be a part of the community development discussions. I thought we had invited them.
We had invited them. I mean, I certainly had invited them, and they came to a different conclusion before I could say, no, you're have an opportunity to speak up if, at the end of the
I
meeting.
think
It also
they
wouldn't
may-
surprise me at this point. It would not surprise me one bit if they said, "You're out of your mind if you think I'm walking into that room."
Right.
We don't want to be wrapped up in the library conversation. Thank you, no thank you.
And I think, well,
That-
I'm not gonna say it.
Which,
Well, if
which
they make it-
absolutely solves this issue for me. We would have made an effort to add the information, and it wasn't.
Are you going to
forthcoming.
osmosis, or should I?
This is the osmosis introduction. I will need to apologize at the same time for subjecting them to this, so however you want to do it.
I'll call you tomorrow.
Send Tyler a text right now.
I do think there's merit in just demonstrating and having this anxiety over the perceived impropriety. I mean, just voicing it.
Okay. Would you please, someone reach out?
I can.
And, if they want to have the Smiths Skype in, I think they're in New Zealand, so they'd be about 12 hours difference. So they'd be about, this would be a really nice wake-up call, right? Here, have a cup of coffee and talk to us.
Please,
But-
please communicate that this is not a command performance in any way. right?
No,
This is-
I'm reluctant to put words into Taylor's mouth, but, we met the other day,
He left for a reason.
Yeah, and he expressed his opinion to me that he did not want this to be confused with what they were trying to do, and their intent is to try and, I don't think there's any danger in their proposal being looked at as being for personal gain in any way at all. And, I haven't communicated with Stuart very much because he's in New Zealand and Hawaii, but that was my impression from him as well, was that they preferred that the board just would make a decision about which site you're gonna use.
Yep.
And if you decide to use the RES site, they can work with us and say, okay, how can we make that fit into our plan? And they will work very well with the town in making that work. But
And I like that timeline better.
we had a request from Heather asking about the memo sent. And that, did that actually, the memo that, the letter that Taylor and Stu sent?
What's the thing to do to make sure that makes it to the town office or?
Yeah,
to
was
the
that-
It was
website?
sent to all of us on our
Yeah.
town email, so
You
it's
all
public.
received-
Wasn't it put in the paper as well?
Well, they put
was a
something in the
story- it
paper,
was a
but I don't
news-
know that it was the
With the
exact
whole-
same thing.
The whole letter?
story, wasn't it?
I thought she put it in like as a sidebar, but,
So.
Yes, I think you're right. I think it was a
So,
sidebar.
I mean, we can put that up in the same place that we put
yeah.
the presentation documents from Paul. And
However, if it's not an FOI, I think that we should just ask permission of the writers of that letter, just as a politeness,
Sure. I think I've already done that, but we'll do it again.
to post that, because,
because they did an interview in the press, and I think that they put the whole letter in
The two.
the paper.
if that's the case, we can just point her to it.
All right. So we will invite them if they wish to take the opportunity. And that'll be the first point of business
At the next meeting,
on the 28th.
the 28th meeting. They'll be doing that, Taylor would do it live, but
Yeah.
Stuart would, and
Then they
It's
can follow.
entirely their decision about
Yeah.
who does it, and we'll just make sure that they're aware that any would be welcome.
Oh, okay.
As opposed to Skype.
Thank you for coming out.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Are we done?
Always
Are we-
Workshop adjourned.
all right,
Are we done?
we're done.
Thank you.
Do we have to take this down, or can we leave it up?
Collected.